welcome to this meeting of the Greater Cambridge Partnership Joint Assembly. For those of you who haven't been here before, the facilities are just outside the doors here, and we don't have a scheduled fire alarm, but if anything goes off, the aim is to go down the glass wall staircase down there and meet in the car park and follow instructions from marshals who will direct you should that be required. I'm delighted to say that we have Councillor Ian Bates with us again. He is the Transport Portfolio Holder from the Executive Board. So, can I start with apologies for absence, please?
Thank you, Chairman. We have apologies today from Helen Valentine and Councillor John Williams.
Thank you. Do we have any declarations of interest? Yes, Councillor Bagent.
Chair, I'm a member of the Cambridge Cycling Campaign.
Very good. Anyone else? Very good. Full marks. If anything occurs to other members during the course of the meeting, then feel free to pipe up and declare an interest. It always helps to clarify everyone's understanding. Even if you're in any doubt about it, just throw into the melting pot that you have an interest relating to the item on the agenda. Right then, that takes us to the minutes of the previous meeting. They are in front of you, members. Can we just run through them page by page? Page 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. No objections on the basis of accuracy? No, in that case, I'll take them as agreed. Thank you very much, and I'll sign those in due course. Right then, very good. That takes us to, well, at least on the agenda, in the order of the agenda, it's questions from members of the public. We have had 10 questions from members of the public, and all of those have been accepted under standing orders because they relate to items on the agenda. 6 of them relate to item 6, and 4 relate to item 8, and we're going to receive those questions at the time of those items. The details of the questions have been published and are available for members of the Joint Assembly and the public to see. Right. Item 5 is petitions, and we haven't received any petitions, which takes us on to item 6, which is the Camborne-Cambridge Better Public Transport Scheme. I'll just give an overview of the way I'm going to take this. We're first of all going to receive a short presentation from the officer. We're then going to have a presentation from the Local Liaison Forum Chair. We're then going to have the 6 public questions that I just referred to. Then we're going to have the officer responding to those questions before he gives a substantive report. And then we're going to have the debate among the Assembly members. Could I start then by inviting you, Mr. Blake, to give a presentation or say a few words setting out the overall context?
Thank you, Chair. So I just want to go through a few slides. They're very much linked with the presentation I'm going to give later on city access, but I think they're important for the context both of the Camborne-Cambridge and later on the Histon Road scheme. So if we start from on the slide deck, I mean, I think really just to remind ourselves of the context of the city deal, of the challenge that we face around looking to reduce traffic levels across the Greater Cambridge area. We agreed as part of the city deal arrangements to a reduction of 10 to 15% on the 2011 base figure for traffic levels across Greater Cambridge. Given the growth that has taken place since that point in time, actually that has increased to a requirement to reduce traffic by 24% on today's levels, which is effective 1 in 4 vehicles off the roads. And obviously, that also requires us to cater for the planned growth that is coming in our area. So the planned growth is over and above that. I think in addition, there's been a further development around air quality that wasn't a key consideration at the time of signing the city deal, but very much is something that comes to prominence later on. And I just want to, I'll touch on that later on in my in the slide pack. So if we just flick over to the size and scale of the issue that we face, 2011 position, broadly looking at a quantum of 90,000 jobs, and a modal share of about 50-50 between private car and other modes. And if we roll forward to the end of the city deal period, we can expect under the planned growth scenarios that we've got with the local plan, is that increases to 130,000 jobs, significantly greater number. And to meet the targets and objectives that we've set ourselves, and to deliver a balanced transportation environment within the Greater Cambridge period, we're looking at shifting that mode of transport from about 50-50 to about a third reliance on private motor vehicles. So there is a requirement for a step change in provision of sustainable and public transport modes. This map doesn't come through terribly well on that, but clearly it's just to demonstrate the changing shape and nature of the Greater Cambridge environment. So we are not just looking at the city centre environment. Increasingly, we're looking at growth on the outer edges of the city, which means that the network pressures are being experienced across the network, relating to the growth areas around West Cambridge, Science Park, Biomedical Campus. And therefore, that we need to address and come up with solutions that deal with that. So it's a much more substantive package of intervention requires, rather than just a simple city centre focus. And then just to put that into some sort of context on public transport, we're effectively seeking to move from bar 1 to bar 3, which is tripling the numbers of people using public transport in our environment. Now, broadly, that equates to doubling the public transport service offer that currently exists in the Greater Cambridge area. So that is twice the amount of vehicles, twice the amount of drivers, twice the amount of services to cater for the growth in demand that we are expecting. And again, that means this is not a marginal change in terms of the interventions that we're looking forward, that we're bringing forward. This is a significant and impactful movement in this regard. Finally, and I think this is just in terms of the context, this is very much just work in progress around air quality. We're doing work with colleagues at the City Council on the air quality situation within the city environment. The work at the moment is demonstrating that it is a very marginal environment in terms of air quality, and it is very easy to see how we would trigger intervention under a clean air zone. And the numbers that we're talking about at the moment, which is an average contribution to premature deaths, is 50 on average premature deaths within the Cambridge environment that can be attributed in whole or part to air pollution. So there is a pressing air pollution issue that we need to address in that area. And I think this is my final slide, and I'll pick up from this later on when we go through the city access discussion. But really, there are 3 steps that we're currently exploring. And the first step is very much looking at infrastructure investment, such as investment in Camborne to Cambridge routes, such as investment in the Histon Road scheme, to try and deliver that step change in public transport requirement that is necessary. But we also need to ensure that there are service provision. So an enhancement of services comes forward, and I'll pick up more on that later on. So that was just my context, Chair.
Thank you very much. That's very helpful. I'd like to welcome Alison Norrish and Joanna Rowell from Arup, who are here should members have any questions relating to Appendix 2 when we get to that stage. So welcome. Now, can I invite Helen Bradbury, the chair of the Local Liaison Forum, to come and address us, please?
Hello. Lots of new faces around the table, but the same old one here, I'm afraid. And I've got... Bridget's cut her hair. I've got a new Vice Chair, Philip Allen, of District Councillor of Harston and Comberton. So it's not really a presentation because we only met last night, but I've done my best to draw together what we discussed. So the attendance of the LLF was good again. We had representatives all along the scheme from parish councils, from Bourne, Caldecott, Hardwick, Coton, Barton, Grantchester, Comberton, South Trumpington. We had 4 residents' associations, so 4, 5, from Newnham. We had 2 district councillors, Harston and Caldecott, a county councillor, Hardwick, and 2 city councillors. Plus, and it was quite a big discussion we had because of this, 3 local environmental organisations. So I've tried to draw it together into 5 main points. First of all, my first point is about public engagement. And the timing of LLF meetings. We have just had a review, but despite that review, the timing of the LLF Joint Assembly meetings is such that the input from the LLF cannot be taken into serious consideration by the Joint Assembly members. This is a missed opportunity to receive informed local input. I go to a lot of meetings and I know that most things are most people have decided what they're going to say before they get to the meeting and they've had the papers, and so the fact that I'm just coming along with a verbal report because we met last night actually isn't ideal when so many people with local knowledge contributed last night and 50 members of the public came along. So that's my first question to you. Could the Joint Assembly please consider allowing 2 weeks between the papers being published and the Joint Assembly meeting? Because then, because we need a week to consider the papers, because these are parish councils, they have, you have to get agreement with other people, and then I could write a report the following day, and you could see what we've said and have a week to read that as well. So that's my first question. I think it would work much better if that were the case. The second point under public engagement, what value public consultation actually? And this is a big question people are asking. So the LLF notes that the GCP has proceeded with the route and an alignment within that route that was the most opposed in the public consultation earlier this year, and one that the LLF has repeatedly advised against. So my second question is, what does the GCP consider to be the value of public engagement when it appears to have no effect whatsoever? Okay, point 2, the preferred route and alignment. So I have 5 points on this. So we passed a resolution on this unanimously on the route, that the LLF recommends that no decision be taken on a preferred route or alignment until greater clarity on CAM is provided. That is the proposed network, connectivity and funding. As it currently stands, this offline bus road, as it now is, with its poor connectivity to the Cambridge Biomedical Campus, the Science Park and the City Centre, its poor transport benefits and very low BCR, does not stand up to scrutiny. I've got 5 points to support that. Number 1, the idea of tunnels. Whilst there was support in principle for tunnels, there was great concern about deliverability. There needs to be a degree of certainty about them before this route can be considered, and for the following reasons. So the preferred route does not serve the commuters from Camborne and Bourne. So we had the spokesperson and convener of the coalition of 23 parish councils west of Cambridge come and make the points on this. So the coalition has undertaken an extensive survey concerning where people work and are about to embark on another one. So 23% of people work in central Cambridge, 27% on the southern fringe, Adam Brooks or northern fringe, 25% elsewhere in the district, and 25% outside the district. So only a very small proportion of people can benefit from this £156 million bus road. So the question there is, what will the GCP do for the large majority who cannot benefit? The next question, so the preferred off-road route provides very poor connectivity. And this, I've come here and made this point repeatedly over the past 2.5 years. So how the buses connect onwards to the city centre from Grange Road and the heritage and congestion implications of that are still unknown. It's a big weakness with the scheme. Equally, and more importantly for commuters, it does not provide effective onward links to the biomedical campus or the science park. These links are better made by staying on road or potentially through a northern route, which I discussed below. Of the three, it has the worst connectivity to the main places of employment. Fourth point, the transport benefits do not make sense to people. So the LLF has provided a technical group who have worked until 9 months ago with Mott MacDonald and before that Atkins and have raised repeatedly lots of concerns about this scheme. But the LLF group represented concern that the adjusted BCR of this scheme is still 0.2, 1/10 of what is normally expected of public transport schemes, and journey times are not markedly better than simple on-road alternatives. These are points that group has been making all along and have not been addressed in these proposals. The fifth point, the environmental assessment is considered flawed. There was ongoing concern expressed about the environmental assessment in the Mott MacDonald report, which concludes that an on-road route would be more damaging to ecology and the environment than a 5-kilometre new busway across Madingley Rise and through the West Fields. The West Fields, remember, were protected by High Court judgment in 2008. Equally, the lack of heritage assessment beyond Grange Road, vital for the built heritage preservation of the city, is of concern. So, our next request to the Joint Assembly is that the LLF considers the conclusions of the report to be flawed, based on a poor understanding of the importance of the wider landscape to the setting of the city, particularly the raised Madingley Rise, and the heritage implications within the city. It asks for an independent assessment of each, completed before the full environmental impact assessment and heritage impact assessment is undertaken at planning stage, because we would consider that too late, really. Point 3, CAM and an off-road alternative. So our resolution 2, again passed unanimously, was that the LLF notes that the GCP now only has one route that is compliant with CAM, and so asked that a northern off-road comparator be developed, for which there could be major advantages. It could better connect with the proposed Oxford-Cambridge Expressway and developments and future developments at the Girton Interchange in the longer term, but could link with the Science Park Biomedical Campus and North West Cambridge site now. So, 3.1, ARUP report. We would like a request for information from ARUP, so the LLF would like to see the full ARUP report that looked at, briefly I think, at an alternative northern route and then dismissed it. What were the terms of reference and how were the conclusions reached? Point 4, is it time for a quick win on Madingley Road? So resolution 3, again passed unanimously. Given the likely lengthy timescale involved in building any off-road Cambourne to Cambridge scheme, not least because of the new CAM compliancy brief from the Mayor, the LLF recommends that an inbound bus lane be designed on Madingley Road now. This will provide significant public transport benefit to the residents west of Cambridge and could be undertaken immediately. And my fifth point is independent advisors. The meeting concluded with a discussion about advisors used by GCP. Finally, we concluded the LLF would like to see a panel of independent experts assessing the economic, environmental and transport implications of the scheme, independent of GCP. Thank you.
Right. Thank you very much. Could you turn your microphone off, please? Members, I don't want to open the debate, but we had a very substantive presentation there. And does anyone of you have any questions of clarification you'd like to put before we stand down the chairman? No, thank you very much. That was very impressive and much appreciated. Thank you for giving that to us. Right. Okay. So we now move to the public questions. There are 6 of these, as you recall, and obviously there is a 3-minute window. The traffic light system will operate at, I believe that at amber you have 60 seconds left, and at red you are preying on my good nature, but we'll come to that if the case need be. So, can I first of all call on Dr. Marilyn Tracy, please? Thank you very much. Tracy, I'm so sorry.
Good afternoon. I'm a resident of Coton. The GCP and combined authorities' preferred SRA for the off-road route does not link with future plans for the Oxford to Cambridge Expressway, nor the A14 M11 junction, nor take account of the Comberton to Cambridge Greenway. Neither does it link the majority of commuters to their places of work. It relies on the possibility of as yet unfunded tunnelling. Would the Joint Assembly therefore request that the Board take the recommended SRA off the table until the GCP proposes a scheme that takes account of these other developments? In the meantime, recognising the lack of need for a cycleway and walkway down the 1303 once the parallel Greenway is completed, the GCP could trial a dedicated busway down Madingley Hill, which could, in future, be developed into a fully segregated cam route if approval is given for tunnelling from the West Cambridge site.
Thank you very much. Thank you. And next we have Alan Tracy.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I'm also from Coton. With reference to the Arup report, Appendix 2, page 10, section 4.9, there is a wholly superficial assessment of the alternative proposal put forward by the Cambridge Past, Present and Future organisation and others for a northern route that links with the Girton interchange, which is summarily dismissed by Arup. The detailed basis of their rejection is not included in their report. Given the wide support that an improved Girton interchange has amongst many of the area's residents and interested organisations, will you please instruct Arup to publish in detail the basis for their rejection of this proposal? In the interests of openness, will the Assembly ask that this information is made available to both the public and the Board before they make a decision to discount this option?
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Mr. Blake will answer all these questions shortly. I next have Mr. Littlewood, James Littlewood. Thank you.
Hi. Yes, Chair. Due to the timing of these papers coming out, I submitted my question before some of the information had been released. And so in a way, there's a bit of a complaint here about how and when information is released and the understanding that further information might be subsequently released. So in a way, my question has been answered by the Mott-MacDonald report, which was subsequently released. However, I wanted to retain the opportunity to just add to that, really, which is that the select inclusion of some of the elements that were in the Mott-MacDonald report into the Arup report and also the officers' report. And in the process of going from the detail to the summary, which you will see, that has obviously been a selective process there, and one which I'm concerned about has provided some bias to those reports. For example, the Mott-MacDonald report refers to the on-road route going through 3 wildlife sites, but there's no mention of that when it gets to the officers' report. But my question that I'd like to ask actually relates to the McDonald report still, which is they included some information from responses from Heritage England and Natural England, which we were only given small quotes of, and we were unclear whether they were taken out of context and the context in which that information was provided. And so please could I ask the Assembly to ask the officers to release the full response from Historic England and Natural England to the requests that were made. Thank you.
Right then, thank you very much. And the next question is Roger Tomlinson. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. Frankly, looking around the room, no self-respecting councillor should have to be part of this undemocratic process where the views of our elected representatives are completely ignored and business common sense has no role. GCP appears to value consultation and public engagement, though the development of the route options for Campbell to Cambridge went through a series of 5 iterations, reducing 34 options to 4, then with 6, up to 6 with variants, before public consultation started in 2015. The public said the county transport officers had chosen the wrong routes. You could say the public said they chose the worst possible option, but the officers have championed their choice ever since. The report claims that gathering and then reflecting public and stakeholder support and views are a key factor in option selection. As such, the robust public consultation has informed and shaped the scheme and optioneering process, which has led to the strategic option. Frankly, that is quite simply not true. I'm not a politician. I was stand as a Labour candidate in the elections, and the Lib Dems beat me because they said they were completely opposed to this route. As a politician, I think you'd say what I've just read out is a lie. The County Council's lawyer, when Curtin Parish Council started judicial review proceedings, pointed out that the consultations GCP carries out are not statutory. The Council has the power to ignore the responses. And we can say that, it was said again at the LLF last night, that attenders at the LLF, workshops, focus groups, etc., just face contention with the officers over the discussions. The route options chosen by the officers not chosen by the officers, have never been fully evaluated. I actually think that means this question can't be answered by Peter. I think it needs to be answered by the chair and the members. The main part of the question, the Greater Cambridge Partnership is not the County Council. Under the Constitution, it's clearly meant to be a collaboration between the 3 district councils and the County Council. Can we have an explanation of what is the actual consultation policy, how the views of the public are actually taken into account? There is no evidence to date of any of the public views being taken into account. And despite the report claiming a whole series of actions that have been taken, the main objections from the public are continuously ignored. And we are trying to get you to look at a good solution, not just the one the officers preferred. So, how are the internal decisions taken, and under what authority is the public input, including from local elected representatives and councillors, ignored? Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. And the next question is from Alistair Burford.
Thank you. Good afternoon. Given that the Mayor and the GCP have agreed that the transport system is a CAM rather than a guided busway, should the GCP be looking at an alternative route? The Arup report made recommendations that the route must align with CAM system. However, there is no evidence in the report that it will. Should the GCP now identify an alternative route that would better fit CAM? If the goal is to get to Cambridge West site and then onto the wider employment centres, the Biocampus and the Science Park, is a route north of the A428 and the 1303, and I don't necessarily mean the Girton interchange, Is a route north of the A428 and 1303 not a more direct and less environmentally damaging alternative? And you may get public support.
All right, thank you very much. And the final question is from Dr. Gabriel Fox.
Hello, I'm Gabriel Fox. I'm the Vice Chair of Coton Parish Council. I don't normally appear before you in such casual garb, so I apologise. I just stepped off a transatlantic flight and could think of nothing I wanted to do more than come straight to see you and ask my question. So I wanted to quickly make a point. So we've heard a lot about the proposed CAM metro and the tunnels under the city, which is potentially an interesting scheme, but I think it's fair to say that it's a scheme which has significant hurdles and will be extremely difficult to bring to life. And I make the point in my written question that there are only 3 metros in the whole of the UK, 2 of them developed in the 19th century, one of which has not even been expanded since then, and one in Tyne and Wear, which is 40 years old. These things are very, very difficult to bring to life. They take many, many years, decades, well beyond the life of even 1 or 2 terms of a mayor or of a local authority. And they are extremely expensive. The mayor has already suggested a £3 billion price tag, and I suspect that that is being very optimistic once you add in everything else and the tendency of these schemes to double and double again in price. And if you consider that the London Underground system, which operates on something like £2 billion a year of fares, makes a very slender operating margin and a whopping £600 million a year deficit when you take into account depreciation and such like. If this is going to be funded by private investment, it could be many thousands of years before investors get their money back. And if it comes from the public, then bear in mind that £3 billion is about, well, a £3 to £6 billion price tag could easily be a decade of all the expenditure of the councils represented around the chamber here. So these are massive amounts of money. So I'm not here to say it's good or a bad idea, but the fact is that it is a great challenge, and it's a long way from being a credible solution as we currently stand. So with that in mind, we are keen to understand why there is any need now to specify a preferred route for Camborne to Grange Road, rather than waiting until we know if the metro as a whole can be funded and delivered. Why can it not simply be parked pending? What is proposed to improve public transport for this area in the interim, which could easily be a decade, could be more, could be 20 years? And what would happen to the supposed preferred off-road route that's been flagged if the metro actually does not go ahead? Thank you.
Right, thank you very much to all the questioners there. So, Peter, you're going to start off by addressing the questions, is that right? And then you're going to move into your report. Yeah.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I'm going to go through I've got a summary of the responses, but obviously we write to all of the questioners anyway to provide a full response. So in terms of the first question, what I tried to do in the presentation was to bring forward the context and the urgent and pressing need we face to deliver significant enhancement in public transport services. The Camborne to Cambridge project is consistent with the local plan that has gone through and with other sort of transportation documents that exist. And what we are doing is seeking to develop a scheme on that basis. I think it is important to recognise that this report does not propose any final decisions at this stage, and I think hopefully it's at pains to explain that any final decisions are still some period of time away, not least because we need to consult and do further work on the phase out to Camborne so that we can consider the scheme in its entirety. Nevertheless, the work that is done to date is consistent with the Highways England's plans on the A14 and the M11. The work done today will complement the proposed Greenway that is out to consultation at the moment, so there are no final proposals on that. And I think just a passing comment to the Oxford-Cambridge Expressway, which is being talked about, but is some significant period of time away in terms of development, not least because there is no statutory planning or transportation basis for that project yet. And there's an awful lot of work that needs to do to get to that stage, let alone construction. So I think in terms of the scheme, this is on a pathway to development, but there is more work to do in that regard. In terms of when we talk about the Northern Alignment, and I think this came up at the liaison forum last night, and we recognised, I outlined that work has previously been done on the Northern Alignment, albeit some time ago, and I undertook to take that work together, dust it down and produce it to demonstrate the work that had been undertaken to date. I would just make a passing comment in terms of the directness or otherwise, in that the work indicated that the route to Girton was less direct and by quite a way, and that any reliance on the Girton interchange, which again is a significant highway infrastructure scheme, that at the moment we have no assurance that Highways England are seeking to take this forward in any way, shape or form in the short term. Clearly that would be required as any potential link. Nevertheless, I will produce that information as I promised yesterday evening. In a similar form, in terms of the James's question, we will release that information as you request from Natural England in that regard.
And Historic England.
Pardon?
And Historic England.
Was it? Sorry, both. Yeah, I only wrote one down. Apologies. In terms of the role of consultation, and again we discussed this at some length yesterday evening. The Greater Cambridge Partnership is following the required process to deliver and develop a major transportation scheme. That requires analysis of a whole series of considerations in terms of the transport benefits, disbenefits, engineering, environmental concerns, and includes public consultation in that process, both pre-statutory at an early stage, which was undertaken, and statutory consultation as we go through the process. That will continue to be undertaken, and we will need to demonstrate that we've gone through that process when we take any final decisions on the outline business case. An awful lot of information has been produced, is attached to the report and is on our website, and we've sought to be as clear as we can in terms of those public responses on the various options for the last consultation, but we will continue to use the approved process because that's what we are required to do. I think then we touched again upon a Northern Alignment, and my response is as previous, albeit just to emphasise that I'll produce that information as promised. And I think then in terms of the final question regarding the challenges of delivering infrastructure of this nature in terms of the camp, I entirely accept the challenges as it was put forward. Again, just to reiterate, there are no decisions today. In recognition of the challenge that you've outlined of delivering these projects, we are working very closely with colleagues in the combined authority. They are working towards a timescale for a strategic business case in January, and we are involved in them in the detailed work, both at a macro level, but also at a level that links to any Canberra to Cambridge proposals. And we will continue that joint working into the new year and beyond. I hope that answers the questions. In summary, Chair, we'll provide the full written response as usual. In terms of the report itself, I don't want to go through this in a level of detail because I brought Joe Baker from Mott to McDonald's along, who's got a few slides that will just talk around route alignment issues and business case issues. But I think I just wanted to go through the process hitherto in terms of the report seeks to provide an update on both the public consultation that was undertaken towards the end of last year, and it references the public consultation report that been produced and is available. That notes very clearly the public response in terms of the public preference was for on-road solutions as opposed to off-road solutions, and so that information is available. The report references the work that's been undertaken with the Combined Authority, both in terms of the review that's been undertaken by the Combined Authority for alignment, and that has said that the work to date has been robust, but that it must continue to be undertaken in accordance with the components of CAM to be viewed as to be aligned, and that work will need to continue as we go to a final decision, probably in the autumn of next year. And I think finally, Chair, before I hand over to Joe, I just want to draw attention to the sort of timescales at the very end of the report, because I think there's a couple of very key next steps that I want members to be clear on. So the report as published today that we will go forward with the Executive Board is seeking to do the further work on the route out to Camborne, so that we can come back to you at the end of next year with a complete route scheme, with all the necessary information that you would expect, including public consultation for the outline business case, and we can put that in front of you as decision makers in terms of your view. That we continue to work with the Combined Authority on development of the CAM, and at the moment the Combined Authority are working towards producing their strategic business case in January. That will be an important consideration for us and needs to be reflected within our thinking, both now and going forward. And that following the production of that strategic business case, and if it strays a couple of weeks into February, we'll need to move back a sort of a tad accordingly. We will then undertake the formal consultation on the stretch out to Camborne, because we want to allow the opportunity for the public to be cited on the strategic business case before they undertake that. We undertake that second phase of consultation. And at the moment, our target is to bring this back to you and the Executive Board in the autumn of next year for a final consideration on the outline business case. I think I've spoken enough, Chair, so I'm just going to hand over to Joe, who'll go through a few thoughts of the detail.
Thank you, Peter. We'll run through a few slides that explain the interim report, which I think some of you should have received in your packs, and others will certainly have seen already. It's an annex to the officer report relating to this scheme. It is, as described, an interim report. It's giving you an update on the work that's been done to date on the scheme, heading towards an outline business case, and as such, as members of the public have rightly pointed out, it is not yet the complete document, but I think it gives you a useful impression of where we've got to so far. Just running through the first slide, we started this process following the consultation that was undertaken last year over December and January of this year, looking at what we called optimised on and off-road alternatives in terms of the section of the Camborne to Cambridge scheme east of Madingley Marsh roundabout. We looked at a comparison of option A and option B. Option A was the original proposed inbound bus lane scheme. Option B was the alternative proposed by the local liaison forum and others within the community, which looked at a central tidal bus scheme. There has been some debate around the need for gantries on this scheme. Gantries, from a road safety point of view, are an essential part of the signing for a tidal scheme in general, particularly one with buses, which does not have a UK precedent. So the option B scored more poorly, and that was driven partly by the fact it's more complex and expensive, but also the gantries has a stronger environmental impact and in some cases would have quite strong adverse impacts on the Triple S site, Madingley Wood, and also the American Cemetery. And these are the two key issues to which the letters from Natural England and English Heritage refer. So having done an assessment of these two schemes using our tool inset, which is based on DFT's proposed recommended EAST tool, which is a sort of standard scheme appraisal tool, we, if you come on the next slide, came up with what we called an optimised on-road option. This was primarily comprising the inbound bus lanes, but also reflecting the driver behind option B in that there should be some outbound bus lane. We added some in, but I'll show you some drawings of that in a minute. That, however, was done without the need for any gantries and all within the highway boundary, so without the need for property take or demolitions. If you just go to the next slide, Earlier this year, we had some workshop sessions to work through with LLF members and others some of the emerging ideas. And this slide, which again you should have in your packs, gives you a very brief update of the key elements of the on-road options. So 4 main elements at the Madingley roundabout. What we've added to option A in reflection of the desire to see option B is a section of outbound bus lane to assist with peak hour traffic. Moving to the east, when you get to junction 13, we've looked at widening to the bridge and a layout which gives you 2 lanes of traffic turning right from the northbound off-slip at junction 13, leaving the M11 and turning into the city centre, which is again recognised as one of the congestion pinch points concern both to Highways England and to the authorities. Then moving further east of that and recognising the problems that occur because of the proximity of the new Eddington development, the existing park and ride and junction 13, a new arrangement whereby access to and from the park and ride site would go via the Eddington access, with the exception of a left turn into the park and ride site. So that would be a way of simplifying the current structure where you've got 4 junctions in a row, that way optimising the performance there. That arrangement enables you to get buses going into the city to the front of the queue as they go through the junction at the Eddington development, and actually removes the need for a further bus lane, because thereafter going up the Madingley Road, the buses are ahead of the rest of the traffic and can proceed relatively undisturbed into the city centre. So that additional section of bus lane, given the very limited space on Madingley Road, is not justified, and the space can be released to enable the provision of additional cycling facilities, which have also been strongly requested in public consultations relating to this scheme. So that gives you a very quick summary of the on-road options. If you can go to the next slide, the off-road was considered in some depth based on the alternatives that were looked at the public consultation at the end of last year and the beginning of this year. We broke the area down into 5 sections and looked at some detail at generally the pink and blue alternatives, although as it goes through the West Cambridge site, there's an additional light green option. In general, the blue options, when considered against a range of factors, environmental, transportation, operational, etc., performs better. The one exception was during the assessment of the West Cambridge site and in engagement with the university, recognising some very specific technical constraints where there's very high levels of sensitivity to vibration and electromagnetic interference, that a light green option, which avoided a particularly sensitive receptor, would be preferable. That follows an existing route, and whereas in the consultation we had assumed that would have to be on road, in discussion with the university, it's been recognised that if we follow that route through West Cambridge, we would need to look at a segregated route that allows rapid progress of the vehicles on the C2C scheme. So that gives you the overall scheme for the off-road option, proceeding through the Grange Field over to the rifle range track past the rugby ground. And again, a variant on the scheme that was looked at public consultation was to move the blue alignment through Grange Field further into the corner of the field to minimise the impact on the Grange Field itself. We did consider an option that went right to the corner of the field, but having consulted with the local ecologists, we advised that that has proximity to a number of ponds that may have species such as great crested newts present, and therefore avoiding the very corner of the field was deemed to be advantageous. So that gives you a quick run through of how the schemes were developed. If we can proceed to the next slide, we have started the process of economic appraisal of the schemes. That comprises really 3 levels of benefits. The level 1 is the conventional transport benefits that form the baseline benefit cost ratio and is based primarily on travel time savings, though there are a number of other components such as accident savings, fuel costs, etc. The second level is the wider economic benefits that would result from transport investment. So, for example, creation of improved access to employment. And the third level is a further level of wider economic benefits, which reflects the land use changes that will be associated with the scheme. And I think in the context of the Camborne to Cambridge scheme, it's very important to note that this scheme really is all about unlocking growth in the area to the west of Cambridge. That is in many ways the driver for the city deal arrangement to be established. And as you can see, very quickly to summarise, if you look at the graph on the right-hand side, it compares the left-hand bar chart, looks at the scheme cost of £80 million for the on-road option, the scheme cost for the off-road being around 190 million when all factors, risk, etc., factored in. That is compared against the benefits. So the level 1 and 2 benefits, which give you the direct transport costs and the what we call the level 2 wider economic benefits, do not quite match up to the scheme costs. When the level 3 benefits, the costs associated with land use development are factored in, both the on-road and off-road have a payback of the order of at least 2, and you've got a better benefit of about a ratio of about 3.5 for the off-road scheme. It's very important to note that we have a fast-moving development of land use patterns. The local plans, as people are aware, have just been approved, and so this work needs now to be revised in the light of the latest proposals and the recent budget statement with regards to potential growth on the Oxford-Cambridge corridor. But I think it gives you a clear picture of the overall level of economic benefit that could accrue to the area. And as has been rightly pointed out by the community, the benefit cost ratio, which is the basis on which a conventional transport scheme is funded, is relatively low. That in many ways is the reason why budgets for transport investment have been devolved to many of the city regions to enable them to invest in this type of unlocking infrastructure that enables growth. Is not about just dealing with existing travel demand on a highway, it's about enabling the future growth for the region. So just to give you a very quick summary of the headlines of the assessment, overall the off-road scheme aligns better with transport policy. It provides a much more reliable journey with less disruption to existing roads, particularly during the construction process. It is a future-proofing scheme, and there's been obviously discussion of the interrelationship with the CAM scheme. It's very important to be clear, this is a freestanding scheme. It would need to seek approval powers in its own right as a complete scheme, because as has been rightfully pointed out by Dr. Fox, the timescale for development of CAM cannot be assumed at the moment. However, there is very clear alignment between this scheme and CAM, and the off-road scheme could be very easily incorporated into CAM in due course, and that is the subject of the work my colleagues at ARUP have been undertaking. And whilst there is a high level of debate about this, it is overall, in terms of heritage and biodiversity, when you consider the most highly protected constraints along the route, it is better in terms of heritage and biodiversity, with significant opportunities for additional compensation planting that add to the natural capital of the area. In terms of the on-road scheme, the one most significant change is that clearly that has less impact on the green belt. That has been very much recognised by ourselves as a constraint in terms of the off-road. However, as you know, transport is not an inappropriate use in the green belt, provided certain conditions are met. And clearly the on-road has a lower level of cost. So that gives you a very quick summary, and the specific route alignment which has been produced at this point in time is now on the screen. As I said, that is primarily the blue route, as was taken to consultation, with the light green route going through the West Cambridge site. This is still under development. It is part of the work that is heading towards development of an outline business case, with the aim for this to comprise phase 1, to be combined with a phase 2 to be developed post-consultation, should we be approved to move forward to consultation, and with the addition of a park and ride site that would be considered in the light of the whole scheme. And the aim of this is to take it forward to a final GCP board decision later in next year. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Councillor Bates, would you like to add anything to the what has already been said?
Not at this stage, Mr. Chairman.
No? Okay, thank you very much. Right then, so members, here we are. It's 5 to 3 and we can now start the discussion on this item. So who would like to go out? Councillor Topping.
That's very generous of you, Chair. I do apologise for being late, but it's very good of you to give me the opportunity to ask the first question. Or first comment. Some of this might be a bit dry, but if I think about the choreography of the strategic business case that you mentioned that the combined authority is working on, I wonder whether there is going to be sufficient time, given that will be produced in early part of next year, for the outline business case for this route, which is being worked up and obviously has to be in a great deal more detail, whether there is sufficient time for the second to take account of the first. But you know, that is in some ways just one to look at. The other question or comment that I had was that my understanding is that there is a requirement from the combined authority that this route needs to be consistent with the longer term aspiration for a CAM metro. And I wonder if there's an argument that that requirement to be consistent does not mean that an interim solution has to follow what is likely to be an off-road metro. And it could be said that given the pressing need, and I recognise the point that this is about building for the future, but there is a pressing need at the moment, that an on-road solution would be deliverable more quickly and would cost significantly less, and would therefore allow longer time for a more permanent CAM metro solution to be developed. And I just wonder whether that can be factored into the work that's going to be taking place on the outline business case. Because it's very clear that the outline business case has to be the option with a full testing of the delivery mechanisms and all the rest of it. So I'm not trying to throw a spanner in at the last minute, but I just wonder whether that point could be considered.
Actually, I think both of those points are quite useful clarification to inform the rest of the discussion on process and choreography. Are you able to help us?
Well, I mean, I can certainly offer a view, Chair. I mean, we recognise the challenge of delivering a very large project such as the CAM. There's a recognition you would deliver it in phases. Not least because the tunnelling section in the centre of the city is a significant engineering undertaking with a sizable financial requirement to deal with. So we are working very closely with colleagues in the combined authority, which is why what we're giving you, what we're presenting, that is an update. We're doing an awful lot of work, for example, around the West Cambridge site and tunnels and tunnel portals, and therefore what do you need to deliver in the shorter term? Do you actually need to go anywhere near the Westfields at all? Which is what we're working on to mitigate and reduce. So the phasing of this is really quite critical. It's also necessary that we work together, because that's the only way that we can achieve the size, the sort of size and scale of impactful change that we're looking at. So the phasing is very important. I mean, the sufficient time is an interesting question. I suggest you don't offer officers any wriggle room in terms of taking their foot off the gas. But nevertheless, the time scale is tight. But we do believe that working closely with colleagues at the combined authority, we can get this through. But the milestones are really quite important, which is why we've got an update today we've then got the strategic business case that will deal with the wider aspirations, and also consider the phasing options as to what we would deliver when, which I think is very important. I hope that was somewhat helpful.
And this possibility of an interim arrangement, which need not necessarily follow the optimal CAM alignment, because many people seem to be asking that. So perhaps we could address that.
So actually, I mean, this was raised by the chair of the liaison forum in her presentation. We discussed it at the liaison forum last night. I know a number of local councillors have said to me, are there some very short-term measures that we can take on road? And I agreed, reiterated last night, we would take that away and say, are there some short-term benefits that can be delivered? I think it's important to manage expectations on that. Short term means that it's within the highway boundary, that it's not costing huge amounts of money that would detract from the sort of wider scheme development. But we will nevertheless, we will go away and we'll do that work, and we will report back, and hopefully that will support decision making through the process.
Okay, I thought that was quite helpful. Councillor Solomon.
Thank you, Chair. Unsurprisingly, I will have quite a few points to make, as I am the ward councillor covering this area, or for part of the route. So I'm going to split this up. There are some specific points that I'd like to make. I'd just like to probe some detail, because I have concerns. And then I'll make some more strategic level points, I hope. So on specific points, in the Mott MacDonald report, there is the RAG summary. It's a useful summary. If we can believe it, quite frankly. I mean, in your own report, Peter, you were clear that the off-road route wasn't favoured in public consultation, and yet you look at the page 34 of the Mott MacDonald report, 6 in that table, public acceptability, you see the options score the same on that RAG basis. And it might not be significant in terms of changing the overall score, but it's indicative of a lack of faith in this process. You know, if these are scoring the same, when you've stated so clearly that the off-road is not favoured, how do we trust any of the scoring? I'm sure there's lots of detail and lots of work gone into this. I mean, similarly, and this was a point that was raised at the LLF last night, the heritage and the environment scores are, it's only based, from my understanding of the answers last night, on the reports back from Natural England and Historic England, which are focused on the American Cemetery and the Triple SI. And so the environmental assessment on the other parts of the route seems to just not be there from what we understand, or at least not in enough depth, and it's certainly not reported on in any great depth. So it was mentioned last night. You know, can we see some more detail on that on the heritage and environmental concerns across the whole of the off-road section, and not just focused around the Triple SI. I know they are more important from a national point of view, but this is also a local decision. And I think that one of the biggest things that I'd like to probe in terms of specific points is the wider economic benefit analysis, which is, I mean, there's a significant difference between the two, shown in the bar chart. There's very little detail about how those calculations are arrived at. There's very little detail on what the inputs are. It's very high level. It's doesn't give any great deal of sensitivity or what this is dependent on. And it's quite shocking to see such a big difference between the two when it appears the only difference is in the time, the journey time from Madingley Mulch to Grange Road, and that there is more reliability around that time. This question of the land use changes. Why does the on-road route not open up? If it's based on the sites that are in the local plan, why does the on-road route not open those up to the same extent? I'd just like an explanation of that. Because if you go just off the journey times, I mean, it's interesting in itself. In your report, Peter, in 6.11, there's a table. This is page 25, if anyone wants to look at it. And you have the patronage there. There is no difference between the on-road and the off-road route in the patronage. So how is the benefit so much greater if it's only based on a 5-minute difference? I mean, in the absence of any detail on how the calculation is arrived at, you kind of end up doing some back-of-the-envelope calculations. And I don't make any claims that these are accurate. But on the wider economic benefits, you're talking about, say, take the patronage as 3,000 people per day. The difference between the two assessments of the wider economic benefits is about 550 million, I think. So you're talking about around about 180,000, I think, per passenger for a 5-minute difference. I mean, that per day, that seems like quite a lot. I mean, over a year, that's 30 hours per passenger. It just puts some scale into that. I'm interested to know how that is broken down. And I think we really need to see a lot more detail and a lot more sensitivity on that. I don't think there is enough there to reasonably make a decision. Yes, the overall numbers are clearly different, but I just don't feel that they are trustable. I don't like to question a professional's work, but it's up to us to scrutinise. And what I'm really saying is that there is not enough information here to scrutinise in sufficient detail. And that's been a consistent theme across the engagement with this whole project over years now, that there hasn't been sufficient evidence to scrutinise. The final detailed point I'd just like to pick up on, which is a little bit of a minor point, although may not be minor if this scheme is ultimately forced through, is the mitigation. So I think in your report, Peter, you talk about mitigation. I'm just looking for the paragraph that's in. I think it's 4.11. I just noticed that you talk about extensive landscaping and design proposals. You give an example on that. The Arup report has a lot more in terms of extensive landscaping, but recognises the cost on that. Can we explicitly get that in terms of cutting, lowering the route, potentially even cutting the route? Because it feels like that is ruling that out in terms of mitigation. I don't know if is that already ruled out on a cost basis. I know the Arup report says that it's would be quite costly. So I've picked up some specific points. The LLF has made lots more specific points. Their technical group has worked hard on this when they've they've been involved, they have felt ignored. I know you're going to provide written answers to the LLF's questions from yesterday, but I think there's a lot more. There's an opportunity. We've had this pause to re-engage a lot more constructively with the LLF and work through the details of these objections, possibly, as they mentioned themselves, with some kind of independent involvement in that, because the fact is that trust has broken down between the GCP and the stakeholders, and that's where we are now. And I think the time and effort that they have put into trying to work with the GCP on this, they deserve that to be responded to. So the broader strategic point, it does touch on something that Councillor Topping mentioned. The goalposts on this have moved again. We now have a requirement that this is a policy requirement, I understand it, that this is CAM compliant, and we only have one option on the table that is CAM compliant. The on-road option cannot serve CAM, as I understand it. It's not segregated. The Arup report does mention that segregation could be possible on the road. I don't know if that is something that GCP has actually looked into in order to have a reasonable comparator. But I do think it's really important that if you are making a decision, best practice is surely to be able to see that in comparison to something that meets the policy requirement. I can't believe that would not be best practice to only go for one route. Now, you say that this has been looked at before, and that you will dust down the details of the northern route. We need to see those details, and I'd like to see it presented in a very coherent way, because actually from the Arup report, routes, their summary table, so this is on page 9 of the Arup report, if you look down the column of Route C, it repeatedly says it would depend on the interaction with the M11. And actually, at the more optimal end of the ranges quoted, okay, it's only a summary, it would be very competitive, it would seem, with Route A. Yes, it's longer, but at the shortest end, they're saying 9 minutes. As compared to Route A, which is 7 to 8 minutes, which, by the way, is a lot faster than the Madding. That's for Madingley Mulch to Grange Road. Madingley Mulch to the city centre. When the time, I think you quoted in your report again on that table 611, is 12 minutes to get from Madingley Mulch to Grange Road. So I don't know whether this is assuming tunnels on that timing, or whether this was just looking at the route options for the GCP's proposal. The cost-benefit analysis around it. All of these things are proceed with caution, but they could be competitive. What this comes down to is Route A has been optimised, it seems to me, and Route C hasn't been. And the only big stopping point that Arup make, and I'd be interested to know what the terms of reference were for this, is that it's not deliverable by 2025. We don't actually know when it would be deliverable by, but it's not deliverable by 2025. And it's not deliverable by 2025 because we rejected it. But it seems on this basis, we rejected it unreasonably, because it actually is a competitive alternative. So you really need to show us why the hell we rejected it. And if we didn't reject it reasonably, then you need to go back and work it again, because it would have far more stakeholder support. It has far better potential to link into a wider network. So I would just ask you to really prioritise working that very quickly, because that could be a really important game changer on this project that would have stakeholder support and fit with the thanks, Tim. Fit with the project objectives. And just finally, again, to echo Councillor Topping's point, it's a very good point, and it's been made by the LF as well, the interim solution. If that looks attractive and it causes a delay, well, you know, so what? Let's get the decision right rather than panic about the delay, particularly if we have a good interim solution. And that interim solution is do what you can on road, understand within the constraints that you've got, but then you have something in place which deals with this priority, and you can see the priority for the inbound, which is somewhere else in your report. It's clear that that is the biggest problem right now. If we have an urgent thing to deal with, let's deal with that. Once you've done that, you buy yourself time, and that is actually the future-proof solution, because it allows all these other things like the CAM strategic outline business case to come forward, the development of the Oxford-Cambridge Expressway, the development of East-West Rail. And just to refer you to that, I think it's paragraph 1.2 of your report has a quote from the National Infrastructure Commission. Where have we got? 2.13 on page 18. So the National Infrastructure Commission focuses on maximising the opportunities associated with the development of East-West Rail and the Oxford-Cambridge Expressway, integrating mass rapid transit with these schemes to enable effective first-last mile connectivity in a way that enhances the value of these strategic infrastructure projects. So, I mean, firstly, I mean, what engagement is there to integrate those schemes? And if you say that they're not there yet, they're not sufficiently advanced, then let's time it, because if these are the national strategic projects, then we should be working out how to fit in with those properly. And I do think that an interim solution solves the immediate problem and allows you to fit in with that bigger strategic picture. Thanks very much, Tim.
Yes, Councillor Solomon, I did give you an enormous amount of time there, which I thought was only fair, given you are the local member, and I think you articulated local concerns very concisely and forcefully, and you asked some very searching questions and left us with some quite thought-provoking observations. On your last point about you know, the strategic context, yes, get the word right, that prompts me to make use of the presence of our guests from Arup and ask them if they could perhaps give us their expert opinion on how they see the deliverability of the Cambridge Autonomous Metro from their perspective.
Yeah, okay, I'll take this. I think the short answer is, and I know it's not going to be very palatable, is it's a work in progress that Arup have been advising technically the CA with regards to funding and the technical aspects, if you like, the buildability of an overall CAM scheme. We've been working with over a number of months with their technical team, and it is fair to say that in terms of can you build an underground system, yes, it is buildable. The engineering behind it is certainly proven, and it is possible. And in terms of the funding, the SOBC is due to be out, as we've discussed earlier, in January, and we're working, the CA and the GCP are now working together to ensure that covers the overall CAM scheme and GCP elements.
I can talk about quickly the programme for the SOBC if you would like me to.
That would be quite helpful, I think. I know we're taking some time from the immediate discussion, but I think the context would be really helpful. Yeah. Yes.
I think really I just wanted to state that a strategic outline business case is a Green Book approach which uses... Sorry. A strategic outline business case is going to follow the Green Book Treasury principles. We are coordinating it with Steer at the moment. It will be available publicly when it's been published to the Combined Authority and the Greater Cambridge Partnership. As Peter said, currently we're looking at that being available next year, January or February. It's a comprehensive business case and it will cover a number of aspects, as I say, using Treasury guidelines.
Right, thank you very much. If you could press the button, thank you. I don't have any other speakers apart from the Vice Chairman. Do you want...
Are you going to get responses to...
We're definitely going to get answers, but I was thinking of taking the rest of the speakers first.
It was quite a lot.
Yeah, you would like me to deal with them first? Okay, fair enough. Since he did command the meeting for quite a long time, that's only fair. Right, Mr. Blake.
Thank you, Chair. I know we discussed some of these last night, so it is worth asking Joe to comment on some of the detail. I mean, just a few, I suppose, comments from me. We recognise the work is ongoing, particularly around the business case, and we've tried to be explicit in the report around that. So there is more information to pull together about both the econometrics and the environmental issues, and that will be put in the public forum in advance, well in advance of taking a formal decision. So I would acknowledge it's not all there, albeit I know Joe will have a few comments around some of the issues that you raise. Clearly, there are issues around the interim solution, and I agreed, we've spoken about it previously, and I agreed at the liaison forum last night that we will go away and explore whether there is an interim solution that we can yeah, can I get back to you on a timescale, because I don't want to give something and then miss it. You know, we've got to do the right piece of work, and a lot of that, frankly, is understanding exactly the extent of the highway boundary and what is deliverable in what sort of timescale. And I've commented previously on the northern route around the evidence and pulling that together into a single document so that is understood. And then I'm sure that there may well be questions on that. The work on Expressway and East West Rail is going. It's going at very different paces. We are in regular discussions, and I know certainly the constituent authorities are in discussions on various route alignment options, and we are expecting consultation still early next year. I'm looking to Ian because I know Ian's closely involved in this, early next year on that, which will flesh out not just what the strategic options are, but also the timetable for that, which I think is the key unknown. And then the final one for me before I pass to Joe is around the mitigation. And we recognise, we say very clearly there is a lot more work to do on mitigation. We haven't ruled anything out. Because clearly to do that, there would be a requirement for an explanation, and I'm sure under the sort of scrutiny role, you would want to then come back on that. So there is a particular piece of work around mitigation on any final route alignment and an explanation of what is and what is not possible, and then a conversation based on that. And I think, Joe, just to pick up.
Thank you, Peter. And Councillor, I'm always happy to be challenged. We believe challenge is essential, and indeed, to, as I'm sure our colleagues from ARAP would confirm, if you can create a successful business case, it needs internal and external challenge. So no apologies needed on that. With regards to a few of the specific points that you raised, and I think we probably need to go through some of them in a bit more detail. In terms of the responses on public consultation, the off-road alternative performed significantly better than option A, the online scheme. It performed a little less well than option B, the tidal flow scheme, but as I think was raised last night at the LLF as well, the way that had been presented, there was some contention about the need for gantries, and certainly quite a lot of misconceptions being perpetrated that somehow the tidal flow scheme could be delivered without the need for gantries, which I think was reflected by a lot of participants at the consultation as quite a game changer from their perspective. So I'm happy to go through the background to how that was assessed. As you say, that was one of many criteria that were looked at. In terms of heritage and environment, I can assure you that we have looked at heritage and environmental issues right the way along the scheme. As is conventional with a scheme of this nature, we've started with a desk review of the documented constraints, and we have been for some time undergoing a process of more detailed surveys. So ecological surveys, archaeological surveys, etc., to gather more detailed information and refine that. By the time the scheme gets to an environmental impact assessment, there will be a full detailed EIA of all the issues, but we haven't excluded things like the local wildlife sites. What we have had to explain, as you're aware, there have been some quite heated discussions in the LLF about the environment and the suggestion that the offline route cuts through areas of very, very high biodiversity and ecological impact, and that the on-road is somehow a scheme that has no environmental impact. And we have had to substantiate our position by explaining that, in fact, at a national level, and this is a situation which we can only stand by, as Peter says, we'll issue the documentation to explain it more fully, the two most significant sites in terms of heritage and environment are on the online road, and that is just an incontrovertible piece of evidence. That does not mean that we are not cognizant of and concerned regarding ecological and heritage sites along the online route, the offline route as well. And as I say, we are in a process of gathering further information, doing further surveys, and that work will be ongoing. So I hope we can provide a little reassurance on that, and I mean, clearly we can have further discussion around it. In terms of the issues of webs and the link to patronage, and this partly ties back, and there's a danger this could become a much more longer discussion, which we maybe need to have elsewhere. But to keep it in fairly quick terms, the assessment of patronage is based on the work we do to look at the BCR, which is based around committed development, which is a relatively narrow element of the land use associated with the scheme. As you know, Bourne Airfield has not got planning consent, and until only a month or so ago was not in an adopted local plan. So things have been changing very rapidly, and to look at the BCRs, we have to take a cautious DFT compliant approach, which just looks at that. The WEBs, the wider economic benefits, look at the potential development that could result if the scheme is in place, and a fully segregated scheme that is future-proof, that's going to be able to operate without congestion for the next 20 or 30 years, will be far more successful at enabling development than an online alternative, which may buy us a few years remission from congestion, but very quickly at key points such as junction 13, it will fail. So yes, you buy a little bit of opportunity to maybe improve journey times for the next few years. It's not the level of step change of improvement that you need to open up long-term development at points west of the scheme. So that's a very quick summary of what could become a very lengthy and boring discourse around the subject. I think Peter's covered a couple of the other points. Are there any other particular issues within your question that you feel haven't been covered that you want us to touch on?
I felt that you answered those questions, but I'm happy to allow Councillor Sonham to come in again. Given you were promised a whole lot more information and a whole lot more engagement, are there anything that really pressing you at this point?
The only point the additional point that I'd like to raise, and it is an additional point rather than coming back on that. It is in the city access papers later, there's a lot of emphasis on generalised journey time and making an assessment around something that incorporates all aspects of people's journey. Just a question to Peter, I guess, is why isn't that in this assessment? And just the focus is on pure, it seems purely on time.
Sorry, the focus isn't on time. It's just that the time captures a lot of the benefits in terms of the appraisal approach that we are obliged to follow in developing schemes. I mean, it is probably worth arranging conversation around because I think it may help bringing to life in terms of the economic assessment process and what is and what isn't included.
But it's not with me. It's with the
and yeah. And I think we promised.
Sorry, I'll stop.
And I think we've said there's more information to come as the business case progresses, and we'll get that out.
Right. Thank you, Councillor Solomon. You've had your time, which I'm glad I allowed you all that time. But Councillor Bick would like to say something, and then I have.
Thank you, Chair. I have some comments on this. There are different, qualitatively different from the kind of exchange that has just been going on, which is obviously important, but I think it's also necessary to take a step back. Now, I had something to do with the creation of the City Deal, and I have been on this assembly from the start and have followed the course of this project all of that time. All the time I've tried to remain focused on the reason for this project, which in my terms is to make sustainable the significant settlements that are already in existence to the west of Cambridge and the considerable growth in them that we expect in the future in Camborne and Bourne Airfield. Now, that is a bold ambition, and it has to be said, you know, in all terms, it's a bold ambition, because the more sustainable option in planning terms, and let's just recognise this, would have been to have responded to the huge housing need in our area with further urban extensions on the west of Cambridge, like we've already had occur at Trumpington. And in many ways, I think a lot of the future residents of Camborne and Bourne Airfield might have made settlements like that their preference. That's my supposition, and no one has to agree to it, but I know something about the dynamics of people trying to move in this area for work and for other reasons. But that was not the decision that we took. And I say we, in terms of the local authorities involved in the planning process for the Greater Cambridge area. Hence, the obligation on us to ensure that these new and enlarged satellite settlements are just as good for their future residents as well as their current ones. In my judgment, that means not just some pretty good bus services, but first-in-class public transport of the kind that we actually have the City Deal specifically to help us deliver. The City Deal is seen by many people, and I can understand why, as only about transport. In fact, many of its projects are transport projects, but their impact is mainly about enabling homes to be provided, not just any homes anywhere, but decent homes in places which make sense for working families and their children connected to employment and opportunities across Greater Cambridge, and also in a broader societal way where people can grow old and don't feel cut off if they don't keep a car, as we are encouraging a lot of people to think about doing in the future. So the local plans enshrine the underlying planning approach that I've described, and they're now adopted by both the councils, and really in those planning terms, there isn't a turning back. It's therefore important that we deliver on the rest of the deal for the new as well as the existing residents of the area. What really doesn't work is that the space between those new and enlarged settlements becomes somehow impermeable to the many more people who need to use it than actually live in it today. Those people might have had a lot more house building instead, which they may not have liked, but they haven't got that. The planning decisions were not for that. But it really is a step too far to prevent the transport that that housing needs and those people need living in it, to avoid leaving them with a second-rate connection to the economic hub of the local economy, which is the city of Cambridge. Now, this project has been, and that's why it's important to make the observation, someone who's been sitting on the Assembly from the beginning, has been a journey of narrowing down of options for a fast and reliable public transport route. Over most of that time, the assumption was that it would be some form of busway, an updated version, maybe, of the technology already operating to the north and south of Cambridge. Only recently has it become a question whether this could equally be a route that could be adopted for the Cam Metro. As I see it, the route recommended today hasn't been offered because of the Metro. It's not predicated on the Metro. It was where this process has been slowly pointing for some time since we started it in the GCP. Now, I hope the Metro happens, and as many people have said, we don't control, and the timing of that is almost entirely speculative at this point. If it wasn't compatible, if what we're proposing wasn't compatible with the Metro, obviously that should have forced a rethink, but that was not the verdict of the consultants that looked at it, and so I think it's important that we understand the contingency of this and the actual relationship between the Metro and this route alignment. The route alignment needs to be compatible with the Metro, but if you didn't have the Metro, we would probably be looking at this same alignment. Now, I understand absolutely that this landscape that we're trying to do the transport planning across is incredibly sensitive, presents big challenges, and likewise for impact on existing residential amenity. I've got the utmost respect and gratitude for those people like Helen, who I'm one of those old faces as well, who've been listening when Helen has come along with other residents in the area. I mean, they are championing those aspects of the sensitivity of the area, and it's a very important role. And contrary to the drift of some of the contributions, I think you have achieved more than you think you have in this process in creating and sustaining options that have been considered and investigated, been consulted on and evaluated. And it also, we aren't talking about that so much today, but also in relation to the park and ride sites. I am very committed to looking at this whole project critically, as critically as we can, to ensure that if it happens in a way which minimises negative impacts and maximises positive impacts and gives local people a lot of say about how this is done. Now, it may cost a bit more as a result, and that's something that I think we're going to have to get comfortable with in the way we consider the numbers and look at the business case. But the sort of ideas that I'm reading in this report that we've got today, the things that are now being brought into play about increasing access to the countryside, increasing biodiversity, are exactly what we need to be making the price of a scheme like this going ahead. Now, there's obviously going to be a mix of voices on this project, and there always have been right from the start, believe me, and that's obviously going to continue. It will include those who want us to remember why this project is being undertaken and champion a logical process towards its achievement, but it's also going to include, and it must include, voices of the local representatives whose role is to continually challenge it in relation to the impact in their area. And I think Councillor Solomon has rightly put a lot of pressure behind those issues in the questions that he's asked just now. But for the moment, I think that the way this report points is sensible, and I would hope that the board continues to move forward with it, but that it does so with all of the transparency that we need to keep that challenge and scrutiny up, and still listening to the challenges that probably are still to come. So I would just like to put on the record a positive view about the paper and the recommendations in the context of why we are looking at it in the first place.
Thank you very much. And I have now Dr. Williams.
Thank you, Chair Tim. Just thought it would be useful to have a business perspective on this as well. I guess the challenge from a business perspective, if you're not in the Assembly and you're not from the local area, is it's the Madingley Mulch to Grange Road scheme. I think I've made this point several times, and I think a year ago, when you go back to the previous papers, the recommendation of the Assembly and the Board was, when we come next back to this, a bit later than we thought, there would be a clear indication of what the vision was, pretty much as Tim's articulated there. It's got to be about how long is it going to take, what's the benefits, where does it fit in with the wider scheme. So I was disappointed that the paper didn't have that. I think in the appendix there was some indication of potential routes, but it really didn't quite do it. But obviously, being on the Assembly and the advantage of looking through the whole papers, you find in the next article, on page 68, the aspirations for the wider GCP programmes, which is for Cambourne to Cambridge City Centre in less than 30 minutes. Cambourne to CBC, less than 30 minutes. Cambourne to Cambridge Science Park, less than 30 minutes. So in terms of what business want, I think that's quite attractive. I listened to, and I think I've done the non-technical version of what Joe just said. You know, is it something that would compel people to want to live in the communities that we're creating further out of Cambridge? And frankly, if the travel route was less than 30 minutes and it was regular and reliable, people would do it. If you put in something temporary, which kind of makes it a bit faster and a bit more reliable, you're not going to get that step change. So these aren't easy decisions. As Tim says, we're going from outside the green belt, across the green belt into Cambridge City. These are not easy things to do. So the fundamental decision we have to take is what is the cost benefit? The scheme's going to be expensive. There's going to be an environmental cost as well. But what are the benefits? And that's what we've really got to focus on. What are those costs? What are the costs to the local community? What are the costs to local residents versus the benefits? And a lot of it will come down to quality of life. So getting in, at the moment, we have staff who are going to be coming from Cambourne to CBC. It's going to take them about 90 minutes one way. That's just not acceptable. It's not acceptable for business. It's not acceptable for people in the communities themselves. So getting down to a speed at which it makes sense for them is really, really important. And that's what we've got to judge. So I have no problem looking at alternatives, and we need to check that 30 minutes. Is it real? What does it compose of? What are the stats around that? But that's what we've got to aim for, something aspirational, not just some incremental improvements. And those 30-minute journeys or less are actually not, as my understanding, are not dependent on tunnelling. They're not reliant on the CAM. That's less than 30 minutes standalone GCP projects. So let's test that. Let's look at that, see if that's realistic. But let's aim for something aspirational, and let's make sure when the papers come back for each scheme that we understand what the aspirations are for each scheme, rather than, and I know why we do it, going back to the technical aspects of it. Because frankly, I don't understand the technical aspects, and we're right to scrutinise them, but what we need to keep a grip of is why are we doing this more fundamentally? And that's what businesses will get behind. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I have Heather Richards, and then I have Councillor Pagent, and then I'm going to, okay, and then I have Joe Sainsbury as well, and at that point, I think I will close after those three speakers. So, yes, right, yes.
Thank you. Just a quick comment, actually, on what features under number 10, other considerations on page 36. Which talks about the road cycling improvements. And I appreciate that the wider context of this conversation has been around what's happening on and off-road and whether or not it's acceptable in terms of what the CAM scheme is. But I would think that if we're looking for quick wins and possibly as Councillor Solomon was talking about, maybe even alternative arrangements, to focus on more what we can do for cycle improvements along the same road. I know in Peter's report, it says specifically that officers will present a separate report on it for board approval, and I'm genuinely interested on the timescales of that and how that is going to be looked at alongside the other recommendations that have been put forward. Because surely if it's along the same, same part of road, if we're going to be doing anything in terms of walking, pedestrians, and cycling, that should be looked at the same time and potentially even delivered a lot quicker than some of the wider, more grand schemes that we're looking at. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Councillor Bagent.
Thank you, Chair. I attended the LLF last night and it became very clear to me that there is a massive gap between the expectation of the LLF and what we are talking about here today and have been talking about for the last 3 years. I almost completely support all that Councillor Bick said. We're here to provide transport and a route for those people perhaps that haven't even realised they're going to be living at Bourne and Camborne and all the other outlying places, the people in St Ives that have almost doubled the population. And I wonder, having listened to the arguments from the LLF for a long time, I recognise the impact they've had on this committee and how we've listened to what they've said and tried to work within the confines of what they are asking for. But it hasn't altogether worked out like that. Excuse me. There's a massive expectation that we should now we have this consideration of going for the North route again. We listened to those arguments, we've heard those arguments, and as I understand it, they were put to one side. And I'd hate to go back into that debate. I'd hate to get back into a situation where we go round and round so much, we don't actually ever achieve what we're setting out to achieve. So I'm sorry to the people of the LLF. I listened to you last night. I congratulate Joe and Peter for putting up with the sort of language that was used against them last night without reacting. They're officers, they're not councillors, they're not there to be challenged, their integrity to be challenged. That they were accused almost of lying. There was an argument against them that had nothing to do with them as officers. That sort of argument should be made against councillors, not on officers. And I congratulate you for standing there and taking the challenges to your integrity. I was shocked that the chair didn't stop it, but that was the way that the meeting went. But people have got to understand there's a bigger project here than making sure that an LLF is appeased. And of course we're listening and we keep listening to what the LLF are saying. The off-road route, it may be that the current road can be expanded, but it cannot. And I think this point has been made clear. It cannot be expanded to the extent that it will need to be expanded as the 20 or 30 or 40,000 new homes upstream of this are built. It cannot be expanded to accommodate all the extra jobs that are going to be within this circle that is Cambridge City and surrounding it. So we have to have a route that will take extra transport. We cannot afford for the people of Bourne and Camborne to be getting in their cars and coming down these roads and flooding Cambridge City, because it just will not work. It will not work. We are talking about people beyond my lifespan that are going to be using these roads. And they need to have a dedicated route, and it needs to not contain cars and lorries and things like that. It has to be a transport route. I've got a lot that I wanted to say, and I've written it down, but most of it has been said because Tim and and Andy have said it, I find myself at great odds with you, Ian. I think that you raise things that have been talked about and not discarded but dealt with. And it's unfortunate, but we're now 3 years down on this project. And this is a problem. We can keep going back and back and back, but we need to be moving forward. We are not making a decision today. What we're doing is allowing this project to proceed, and I think that we need to do that as quickly as possible. I'm going to stop there. I could go on, but I'm not going.
No, you've thrown a challenge out. I'm going to allow Ian to respond, but first of all, I'm going to let Joe Sainsbury speak.
Thank you, Chair. I'll keep this short. I just wanted to reiterate a couple of points. There's very clearly, from a lot of the comments today, a need for some transparency and detail. My suggestion would be that obviously there's a lot of work that's gone on previous to this for the last 3 years. It's really about summarising that and ensuring that the reports are available for people to peruse if they choose to do so. I have to say I do agree with not going over old ground. I don't think we should reopen the case for lots of different options. The other 2 points that I wanted to make, for me personally, and we've talked about this previously, when it comes to these transport solutions, I do feel that journey time is paramount. Journey time is the only way that we are going to get people out of their cars, and that goes beyond the direct city centre aspects of it. It's got to look at these wider aspects of Bourne and Cambourne. And with that in mind, I think my other plea would be that really the GCP and the city deal is really a unique opportunity for us to do something that's different in the longer term. So while short-term solutions are good to look at, if we went down the on-road solution, we really are looking at something that's maybe only 10, 15 years, but actually what about 20 years' time? So I guess my opinion would really be that we've got to look at that long-term ambitious solution that will have a proper impact on the area. I'll leave it there.
Right, thank you. I've also had an indication from Councillor Topping, but in fact I've decided not to take either Councillor Wilson or Councillor Topping. I'm going to let Councillor Solomon respond to Councillor Bajent if that's what he wants, and also to have the last word, which is the local member, which I think is a privilege which he deserves. So I'm sorry to other members. Yes, I'm sorry to other members, but I did say I was closing the discussion, and we have had an awfully long time on it, I think. I hope you agree that's fair. Okay.
Thank you very much, Chair. I do appreciate being given the final word on this. I just feel I do have to respond to Councillor Bajent on this. The residents in the area do understand the need for Cambourne and the other developments out there. They want to develop something that connects into what we recognise as the important employment centres. They just don't think that this is the best option, and it's not been proven to them. And I'm sorry, this question about going over old ground, if you made a rubbish decision and the evidence, and you haven't probed the evidence enough, then there's no point in throwing good money after bad, as they say. Go and check that you've made the right decision. Because as a new person on here, I've not seen that evidence, and I've looked for it. The LF has been working on this for a long time. They've never seen that evidence. They've just seen this route be pushed and pushed and pushed. As I refer back to the Arup report again, it indicates that the northern route is competitive. So my question to this assembly in that case was, why was it rejected? Because no one's given me an answer on that yet. And I'd just like to say on the context in terms of getting people to work on time, getting to the business centres down to CBC, in terms of the strategic context of East West Rail, the Cambridge, the Expressway, the GCP kicked the Western Orbital part of this, which connected people into CBC far more directly, into the long grass because of a Highways England project. So the precedent is there. The on-road solution that myself and Councillor Topping have talked about is an interim measure. We understand that there is a need for a segregated route. But we're just urging you to produce that information on the northern route and if needs be, take another look at it.
Right, thank you very much. And Councillor Bates, as the Transport Portfolio Holder for the Executive Board, you have an opportunity to respond.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I've listened intensely to what has been said today. So what I'm going to say is I sit on the Executive Board and hold the Portfolio Holder. I'm entirely happy to meet with members, okay, to discuss it with whoever, with the Chairman maybe, or the Vice Chairman, with appropriate consultants perhaps from either MacDonald or from ARAPS, okay, to perhaps deal with some of the issues which have been raised today, linking them in perhaps to Highways England, East West Rail, etc., about the northern route or off-road, on-road, etc. So all I'm offering quite simply is if people wish, I'm happy to meet them either before the Executive Board later on next month or at some point in the future. So I offer that, Mr. Chairman, and of course I'm quite happy for the Chairman of the LFF to attend, etc., but I prefer to keep it perhaps in number terms slightly smaller than having 50 or 60 people there, to try to keep it short and concise with the numbers of people, but I'm happy to content to meet.
Thank you very much. Well, members, that was a very intense discussion. It started with Councillor Topping touching on questions of process and choreography, and in particular this question of whether any interim solution had to follow a long-term optimal alignment. Then Councillor Solomon set the tone of much of the rest of the discussion. First of all, questions about the RAG analysis could be more granular. He was wanting more information on how the wider economic benefits had been assessed, and would appreciate some sensitivity analysis. He was anxious about elements of mitigation. He feared that trust might have been damaged. And in the context that CAM compliance is now a policy requirement, he feels very strongly that we need to be able to compare two schemes which are both compliant. And if an interim solution looks attractive, even if it causes delay, let's get the decision right. Dealing with the urgent problem first would buy time, and that would be the best way to future-proof whatever way forward we took. Councillor Bick, who had played a key part in setting up the whole Greater Cambridge City deal, said that given the development strategy that we adopted, we have to provide the best-in-class public transport, and from his point of view, the direction set by the paper was the right one to go. Bearing in mind, we must bear in mind the need for transparency and openness throughout the process. Dr. Williams said that the possibility of getting from Camborne to Cambridge in 30 minutes was the sort of step change that businesses wanted to hear. Heather Richards suggested that cycling improvements could be explored as an alternative and quick win. Councillor Bagent said that we need a major transport route that can cope with all the extra cars and all the extra houses. And Joe Sainsbury also added that from a business perspective, journey time was paramount. I think we've given that a very, very substantial airing, members, and I'm sure the board will take up all the points which have been raised, and I, on your behalf, will attempt to distill them for them. So thank you very much for that discussion. That leads us into item 7, which is city access and bus service improvements. So we're going to hear the presentation from the officers and have a debate amongst ourselves. We don't have any public questions on this item, so we can go straight into the officers' discussion. There's a little bit of choreography happening. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Chair. If I can ask members just to briefly cast your mind back to the sort of first 5 or 6 slides I've gone through. Hopefully this is as slick as an otter, and we can pick up from there in terms of next steps. So outline the sort of the context and the pressing need for this. First phase is very much looking at the infrastructure investment in using the city deal for a sort of generational change in the transport options that we've got, and I think that's the map that we're currently using. I know it will get updated certainly as we go through the strategic business case for the CAM network over the next couple of months, but really painting that picture of a significant change in infrastructure investment across the piece to deliver a sort of a world-class public transport network in the area. But I think key to that, and a number of members touched upon it in the previous conversation, is actually, well, what's the service offer that is just delivered as part of that? Infrastructure improvements will get us some of the way in terms of dealing with our challenge. But actually, we need to have the confidence that the public transport offer goes way beyond what currently exists. And you know, I described in the context, we need to triple the number of people. And I think a number of you have sort of referred in the previous conversation, well, you're only going to do that if there is significant, and that is significant improvements in journey time and reliability and the like. So what we're suggesting in the paper is there really is a need to increasingly focus on that service offer. And I just try and bring this to life with a couple of examples. It's important to stress that we're looking at the wider Greater Cambridge geography and beyond. So if we're sitting in some of the villages, then it's about making absolutely clear to residents what that increased public transport offer is that may only be 1 or 2 buses a day currently, but needs to be significantly attractive so that people will use that. And so just to try and bring that to life and to pick an example that wasn't picked earlier on, sort of Haverhill to the West Cambridge side, where with the change that's currently required and the current service unreliability, so the timetable tells you it takes you 1 time, but in reality it's taking significantly more than that. We need to achieve a step change in to ensure that this becomes a more attractive, more viable option for people. And I think, just to make clear, we're doing this across the Greater Cambridge geography. We're trying to produce a fancy little interactive map that will bring this to life. You can look at all of the sort of the key locations across the piece that just sort of sets the scene for this. There's a financial consequence to delivering that step change in service provision of around £20 million a year. And I say around, there's a number of variables in that, fares being one of the sort of variables, and obviously the lower fare in itself makes it more attractive to use public transport. The other consequence of that is, as happy as Stagecoach may well be in terms of doubling the number of buses that they've got in our network, actually putting them out in the existing conditions isn't going to achieve a great deal, because they're going to get caught in the same traffic as their current buses and everybody else gets caught in. So there is a need to find a way to free up road space and really look at what options we've got to move traffic off our roads and actually generate the capacity that is required to deliver that. This table just tries to encapsulate some of the options that we've got to deal with both the financial challenge and the road space challenge. And as usual, when I talk about demand management, I raise a sort of general caveat to this, that I accept that not every member of the Assembly supports all aspects, or indeed some of the aspects of this. And it's important we recognise that, and you recognise that in your discussions. But what the paper seeks to outline is that we do have the option of physical constraint. We can close roads. And where we do that, particularly in the city centre cordon, it generates significant benefits in that local area. So we've done some assessment work on if you close Hills Road, unsurprisingly, it generates significant benefits on Hills Road because traffic can no longer go down there. The benefits of a traffic model, I would suggest, demonstrating that. Nevertheless, what it does tend to show is that when we close roads in sort of small numbers and a small geographic area, it simply displaces traffic. The traffic finds another way of doing it, so you show a marked increase in other areas. And also, the physical restrictions don't in of themselves generate any revenue that could deal with the financial challenge of the enhanced services. So I think that slide is fairly self-explanatory, Chair. I don't propose to go through it in detail, other than just to say at the other end of the spectrum, there are the opportunity to explore other non-transport revenues, which may link to say, a council tax, for example, as a method of raising income, but will have no impact in terms of the prevailing traffic situation, and therefore we face the challenge in terms of the additional bus services. So I think that just tries to paint a picture in terms of what the options are of a staged approach to delivering this. This comparative analysis just tries to bring to life, reading sort of round the clock from the top left-hand side, the current situation, and red primarily is car is more attractive, and the deeper red, the more attractive it is, as opposed to green, the more attractive public transport is, and the deeper the green, the more attractive it demonstrates on that basis. That if you overlay infrastructure improvements, service enhancements, and a degree of demand management, you move a picture from a very car-based attractive position to a very public transport-based attractive position in terms of what our strategy may well be going forward. And I think I encapsulated some of those points on the demand management, the wider issues that members we will need to consider, phasing issues, equity issues, and ensuring that we have a detailed evidence base for these considerations as we go forward. And I think finally, in terms of just positioning the paper to Chair, what we're looking at is taking forward through the subject to Assembly and Board's decision to taking forward a further conversation on this. You'll recall the big conversation that we held some time ago around general themes and general concerns on traffic and transportation issues raised, poor public transport, and the problem with congestion and prevailing traffic conditions as being some of the key factors. I think that the report tries to position this to say, can we take that conversation further forward and provide greater flavour and fabric and sort of depth to that conversation around, well, let's explore what good public transport really looks and feels like, and let's explore what managing our road space and managing the pressure and our demand may well look like going forward. I'll happy to hold the chair and take questions.
Councillor Bates, do you have anything to add?
Not at this stage, Mr. Chairman.
No, thank you. Councillor Wilson.
Thank you. This diagram of the proposed routes leaves a lot of villages. I know you've mentioned that it will move out to those villages, but I think at this stage it would be helpful for people in those villages to know a little bit more about that they're not being overlooked. This came through my door this morning. It's the consultation paper on the Oakington Rural Travel Hub. This is intended to serve Oakington and Cottenham immediately, as well as other rural locations. In Cottenham at the moment, we have one bus that goes every 20 minutes. It's a very regular bus, but it does a magical mystery tour of nearly an hour to get into Cambridge. So people don't use it to go to work. It's not viable to go to work. The Oakington Rural Travel Hub would link with the guided busway, which could be really good. You could get to St Ives or Cambridge very quickly. People could then get to Addenbrooks very quickly. We can't get to Addenbrooks at the moment without changing in the centre of town. We can't get to a station without changing into the centre of town. But from Cottenham, there is nothing that goes to Oakington to link up with the rural travel hub. At the moment, it's proposed to have 41 parking spaces. So people will look at the city access proposals where Cottenham doesn't appear, and people will look at this and they're going to say to me, what are they on? What are they thinking of when there is no, when you're dangling like Tantalus something in front of us that might work, but it's not going to work without something filling in between. And I'm at a loss how to answer those questions. And I'm encouraging as many people as possible to come along to that rural travel hub consultation to actually be able to air these other issues, because we haven't had an opportunity to air them before. And people are absolutely crying out. We had the busway just a few miles away. We thought we would link up to it. We had Cambridge North, which was described as serving the northern villages of Cambridge with no way to get there. We have Waterbeach railway station where people from the village go to. My son, who is sight impaired, can't drive, and he applied for access to work funding, and the woman from DWP rang him back and laughed because she said, in order to get to Waterbeach station in the morning to get your train, you would have to leave at 7 o'clock the night before. Now that is, when we are so close to that station, we're a community of over 6,000 people. Because of speculative developments, we're about to become over 8,000 people. We really need good solutions, and we really need to know that those good solutions are going to be happening at the same time as the building is being done, because otherwise the village is going to become gridlocked, and all those people are going to be driving into Cambridge, undermining any plans you have for reducing congestion. And that's all I want to say.
Thank you. Don't forget to turn your microphone off, Eileen, and we'll take that as one example of how a public transport system for the whole of Greater Cambridge has some missing links in it. But in general, obviously, I allowed a lot of local discussion on the previous item, but that was because it was a local project. So let's have some more strategic discussion as well on this item, if possible. So, Councillor Massey.
Thank you, and thank you, Councillor Wilson, for that as well, because it is vitally important that the city access project does not just focus on the city, but outside as well. And so on that, I do wonder, we used to have the bike and bus, or bike, some time ago. I think it was it the Whippet that used to do it? It was only on a Sunday, it was a trial. It got cancelled because it was underused, probably because it was on a Sunday. But that might be one of the options for the rural communities in order to get to their rural hubs for the bus and bike. So you put your bike on the back of the bus and etc. So you can go from A to B. So that could be an option on that. This isn't the first conversation we're going to be having, or we've ever had on city access. We had many conversations a few years ago and they didn't go very well. So we need to learn from those lessons. And I think we are learning from those lessons. So I think we need to make sure that we're bringing the public, businesses and traders along the journey with us so that we've got they can see the vision of the GCP and rather have constant sticks where they constantly feel like they're having sticks thrown at them. We show them what the carrot is. And we need to say to them that what the objective is to have faster transport across the city, but from the villages as well. But not just faster. Can we really focus on the cost element? Because every single person I've spoken to said the reason that they're using their car is not because they think it's quicker, it's because it's cheaper right now. So we really do need to make sure that the offering that we have is extremely low fare. Dare I say it, free? And if we're going to have extremely low fare to the point of that, what would we need to do to get there? And that's where we should start from, the conversation from, as opposed to starting the conversation with we're going to be charging, or we need to charge, or this is how much we need. We need to tell them what the vision is and then discuss how to get to that vision. I'm just going to make sure I've not... and to pick up on the point, a lot of people, even in the city centre currently, have to change buses to get to the train stations and to get to the hospital, and that's not acceptable right now. So we all agree that we need a much better transport system. We need a much better transport system now, let's face it. Newmarket Road especially is at a standstill during peak hours, and especially on a weekend. And if we don't do something now, considering the new developments that are going along that area, and the fact that we've got the ice rink coming in, we've got Aldi's and Lidl's coming in, we know the impact in that area is going to be significant very, very soon. And if we don't do something now, it's going to get even worse before we can even do anything about it.
Thank you. Councillor Gallagher. Kavanagh. The reason I slipped up there is that was the cue I had last time in the last meeting for your name. I'm terribly sorry. Yes, Councillor Kavanagh. Yeah.
Did you say Gallagher?
I did. Yes. I'm so sorry.
There's so many new people around here. I thought someone slipped in.
Yeah. Sorry. Yes.
No. There seems to be a trend developing here of having long speeches, so I'm going to be very short as usual. No, I'd just like to reiterate actually what Heather referred to earlier on, is the fact that there is the need for the cyclists. We're all aware that we are known as the capital of the UK for cycling, and we've got the most people commuting on cycles at the moment, and I think that has been recognised. But I think in this report here, it's still not strong enough for me. I mean, yes, public transport obviously has to be improved, greatly improved, radically, revolutionised, really. And some of the elements here that my colleague just mentioned, much cheaper fares, if not free fares, are hugely important. But we've got to build on the way that people do get around Cambridge on their bikes now. And from my understanding, is that there'll be a huge number more using bicycles to get around if they felt it was safer for them. So when we are looking at all these new schemes, these new expressways and so on, so I think we've got to be thinking, how do the cyclists fit in on this? I mean, what we need really is an expansion of what we've already achieved on Huntington Road and Hills Road, the very good segregated cycle routes. What we need is a city that is a network of segregated cycle routes with very safe junctions for cyclists. I mean, I'm thinking of East Road, Newmarket Road to start with. But because the cyclists are here, and we could have a lot more of them if the roads were a lot safer for them. And I know a lot has been done and is being done, but it was even interesting yesterday, I was reading a report there, Sustrans has been begging the government for more investment in the national cycling network routes because it's completely underfunded. And we get funding from central government now and again, but it tends to be a kind of drip from the DFT rather than a concerted amount of money every year that is invested in cycling across the country. What I'd like the Greater Cambridge Partnership to be doing, and I know we've already put aside funds for improving junctions, and we've got a list of projects that are there, but let's just make a bit more noise about it and what we are achieving and can achieve. And I think put segregation of cyclists from the rest of road users as being a top priority. And as I'm speaking, I'm thinking of our next item, Histon Road.
Right then, Mr. Walkinshaw.
Thank you. I welcome the report, in particular the importance this report puts on the capacity issue, the sheer numbers that we're talking about here. It was referred to in the previous item about the number of people we need to move. I think what is still missing from here, though, is the reference to the numbers of people coming in from outside and how they're going to access this system and get around to the most obvious access point. The current main the main orbital routes around the city are the major regional through routes, so thoroughfares. So we've got already got capacity issues there. People need to be able to get around the city and get to the bit they need to access from easily. And I think that's missing from this report. But I think it is really good to see this in the overall context of the numbers, this trebling of the size or doubling the size of the current thing. We've heard references to the need for orbital routes inside the city as well. I won't go into all of that. Capacity.
Thank you very much. Dr. Williams?
So I'm going to sound like a broken record. So myself and several other members will remember we've been talking about this for a long time. We have a call for evidence back in 2015, and interesting for Councillor Solomon, the new member who's been picked on a little bit here, the answer we came up was rubbish, and we tried to implement it and it didn't work. So there's perhaps a learning there that not everything you do is right first time, and we should try and get things right this time, perhaps. But lots of learnings from that call for evidence. I think it's worth, and I haven't spoken to my business colleagues, but I think when you talk to business in general, this is the #1 priority scheme. They perhaps naively thought when we signed a city deal it was something to do with the city, and that will be the place we're focusing on. Of course, city access is not just of interest to people in the city. I think what we need to be doing a better job of explaining the importance of city access outside of the city, particularly concerned around pollution, because a lot of the pollution is caused on the radial routes coming into Cambridge, as well as the pollution within the city. And we need to find a way of making that clearer so that everybody feels engaged in this process, rather than just those within the city boundaries itself. So I think my concern with this paper really is we know there have historically been some concerns along political lines around the sort of way we control congestion within the city. And I think some of those concerns still exist. Where we've moved on, actually quite positive now, is at least we can have those discussions about what those options are. I think, therefore, it's really important that when we come, and I think we're right to engage the public again, what worries me is we engage them with a set of questions, which is effectively just kicking the ball or the can down the road again. And there's a little bit of element of that here. So what I'd like to see is we need to have some real questions, and I'd like to get some public engagement in that, so we can get some, what are the real questions? This is all about quality of life, this is all about different options for us, cost benefit, congestion charging versus improved public transport. These are complex issues, and we have to ask the questions very clearly and very directly. And I tested with my wife, would you support an intelligent charge? And she did smirk, because I don't think most people outside of the people in the know what intelligent charge means. So can we try and work on some real questions that really mean things, so that when we come to the next review, we aren't left with a whole lot of grey about what people might have meant or what they did support or didn't support, so that the councillors of various flavours can at least see where the public are and have a very good understanding of what they will and will not accept in terms of the next steps. So to summarise all of that, because we are getting a bit long, is can we just make sure the questions are meaningful, and are meaningful both to the public and to officers and to councillors.
Thank you very much. Councillor Topping.
Thank you, Chair. So I said at the last meeting that I still didn't think there was enough in this for the villages of South Cambridgeshire, and maybe, to be honest, maybe we should just go back to the nomenclature that Councillor Bick started this off with, the city deal, because a lot of the discussion is about, routes into the city, and Councillor Bajan saying we don't want cars come flooding the city. Well, the villages of South Cambridgeshire don't want to just become the routes into this city, because I might want to remind people that the economic growth in this part of the world, now that Cambridge itself is pretty full, a lot of the economic growth is in South Cambridgeshire.
Absolutely.
I know that the name, the global brand is Cambridge. And I know that because I have friends in China who talk about Cambridge. And they don't talk about Oxford. But my point is, there has to be more for the villages. I do not want South Cambridgeshire, I do not want the perception of villages in South Cambridgeshire to see themselves as in vassalage to the city deal. And I urge this Assembly and the Board to address that point.
I wholly endorse that point, Councillor Topping. Dr. Wells.
Thank you, Chair. I'd like to echo comments that have already been made, particularly by Andy and Christopher and others. 2 points from me, really. I think, you know, the emphasis here on getting to journey times is a really useful and important milestone. We have not had, and I recognise this is early days, I think you've admitted that, Peter, but the emphasis on journey times is, I think, a really helpful change. You know, we need to, and we've said this before, we need to try and stop talking about building hardware and more about enabling journey times, which then requires some hardware. Get the tail and the dog in the right order, whichever way that is. So I think that's very welcome, but I would absolutely echo the comments from others, which is, and in thinking about how we take journey time conversation forward, think about not just, if you like, the bus or the CAM primary routes, which is what this tends to focus on. What about the villages? What about people commuting from further out by car, probably because there's no other alternative? Where do they interchange into it? Christopher's point. And indeed, you could do a micro version of it, you know, cycling times across town. I mean, but the whole journey time being the sort of unifying theme for all those different constituencies. So can we therefore address the needs of all those constituencies in that conversation? So that would be the first one. The second one is, it would be interesting to do, it seems to me, a little analysis from looking backwards. And I'm just remembering your diagram, Peter, with the arrows pointing up. Actually, a classic project management technique is say, so it is now 2030, what does the world look like? And we actually do face a bit of a logical conundrum here, because we're saying we'd like free bus travel, but if, at least with most of the mechanisms we're talking about, in order to fund that, we'd need quite a reasonable volume of traffic in the city centre, paying quite large parking fees or access fees in some way. And it would be worth doing a calculation to see if that is actually there is a consistent model there. Because by the time you've got hordes of buses coming down all these city centre roads, is there any room left for car traffic? If there's no room for car traffic, where does the revenue come from in order to subsidise the buses? And I think just testing that logically at the 2030 timeframe would be quite useful.
Thank you very much. Councillor Bagent.
Thank you, Chair. I try to be quick, I usually am. We recognise that, and we clearly recognise that people realise that congestion is a problem. We realise that 50+ people a year are being killed in Cambridge City by the fumes from congestion. But that doesn't, they all think that it's about somebody else. It's not actually about them. And we're putting in place the infrastructure to make life easier to be able to get to the outskirts of the city. We are putting in place the infrastructure potentially to get people onto buses. And we hope that there will be an investment in those buses. But I'm coming back to what is becoming a bit of a theme here. We need to make it more attractive. And there has to be a bit of a stick involved in this. You know, the idea that people may have to pay in one shape or another to move around the city of Cambridge, to come into the city of Cambridge, is never going to be a popular idea. But we can't continue to increase the traffic in the city and expect it to be a good result. The good result will come when we actually manage to reduce what now is 24% of the traffic that is coming into Cambridge City. It was 11, it's up to 24. What it's going to be like in 2 or 3 years' time is important, because if we don't stop the increase, then we will have failed. We will have sat here talking for a long time about what we might like to do, and we will have failed. I appreciate the argument from the villages. People need to be able to move around cheaply and quickly. The argument about push bikes, we put on there the fact that it takes 50 minutes to get to from Waterbeach to Cambridge. It takes 25 minutes by push bike, even cycling slowly. That should be sitting there alongside that. People should be able to recognise how much quicker it may just be if you got on a bike. I think that we should be increasing the argument, the proposal, the thought stream that we can provide cheaper, if not free, transport within the city and around Cambridgeshire. I think this should become more of a profile in our argument, because we need to get people out of their cars. We need to be able to pay for the buses to provide those journeys. I appreciate that if we have so many buses that we can't have the cars, but if we don't have too many cars, then the buses can flow freely. Right this moment, you'd need 10 buses to go down Newmarket Road in Cambridge to move 100 people. If you didn't have the cars there, the bus could go up and down and make 10 journeys in the same time. So my plea really is we need a slight shift in emphasis to encourage people to consider what the stick might look like and what the carrot of that stick would be. We need to be transparent about what we're actually trying to achieve.
Thank you very much. Right then, I'm going to have a go on this, if that's permitted. I'm going to refer to paragraph 5.7, and there was a sentence there which sort of gave me pause slightly. Cycling and walking is too often an unsafe, inconvenient or unpleasant experience. And I thought, now, whoever wrote that, you know, did you really imagine that those of us who get on our bicycles or walk somewhere do it because it's an unsafe, inconvenient or unpleasant experience? No, of course not. We do it because we really enjoy it, or we find it convenient or something. And I'm mindful of one of the youngest participants at the executive board meeting a while ago. How old was she? 7 or 8 or something like that, from the primary school. And her words were, "I enjoy cycling because when I cycle, I feel free." And picking up Councillor Kavanagh's point, yes, I think we need to encourage as many people as possible to have that feeling. So on this point about not being a driver myself, I'm starting to feel not quite so out of it, because I'm very heartened to note that there's a significant drop in the proportion of 17 to 24-year-olds who are obtaining driving licenses, because it's becoming less attractive to drive for young people. And I think this is a great step forward, and perhaps gives some indication of the generational change that we are on the cusp of. Now, I'm not a complete dinosaur, and I'll just reiterate one of the points I made at a previous city deal, it was in those days, a joint assembly meeting, which is that I quite like the notion of universal dynamic road pricing, but it would have to be universal to work immediately for me. However, when Alistair Darling, who was the Secretary of State for Transport, made that or floated that possibility in a previous government, it prompted the biggest ever petition, Downing Street petition, that's ever taken place, with 2 million signatures against it, and the idea was promptly dropped. So I'm a little anxious about the whole notion of intelligent charging and how broadly accessible it could be to the population of Greater Cambridge, and by that we mean Cambridge City and South Cambridgeshire. And I think there's a little bit of a propensity to be bedazzled by pound signs. And, you know, we've heard a discussion of the prospect of between 40 and 90 million pounds a year being raised by some form of charging. And it's already been spent several times over, I think, in possible suggestions for how this vast revenue stream might be spent. But I made the point, again, a couple of years ago, that when it comes to revenue-raising measures, we Conservatives have a much shorter word for a revenue-raising measure, and we call it a tax. And in general, from the business motivating background that I tend to come from, in general, tax is not a good thing. It's a brake on economic growth. So you need to have a really, really strong justification before introducing something of that nature. And moving specifically to the question of an intelligent charge in Cambridge, I am very mindful of a workshop which was held as part of the call for evidence that you referred to, Andy. And we had representatives from Transport for London there, and they were specifically asked to make a presentation on the possibility of some form of congestion charging for Cambridge. And they were pulled. They were really taken to task about this and said, look, in your honest opinion, would this work for Cambridge? And they said at that time, which I admit was a few years ago and the world's moved on, that Cambridge lacks the critical mass and it doesn't have, Greater Cambridge, I say, it doesn't have the universal access to public transport that would make such a charge fair and equitable in its administration. So I think there are some very, very challenging questions to be answered about how the practicalities of some form of intelligent charging might be introduced. And I would very much hope that the questions are posed in such a way as to tease out the actual methodology that could be effectively employed to bring such about. I recognise, because I'm a champion of better public transport in Cambridge City and Greater Cambridge, South Cambridgeshire, that there is potentially a £20 million a year annual funding gap in producing a world-class public transport system. And I too am challenged to find an alternative funding source for that. But the example has been raised of the Bay Area Rapid Transport Network in San Francisco and surroundings, and they have a precept on their local sales tax. And, you know, it's not beyond the wit of us in Cambridge and South Cambridgeshire to come up with some way of financing a public transport network which doesn't penalise drivers who for whatever reason, have to use their car to get into central Cambridge. Thank you.
Thanks, Chair. Unusual order. Yeah. But anyway, I wanted to say a few things. I'm really tempted to get into a discussion with Tim on the basis of what he has just said, but actually I don't think that is the point of this report that's in front of us at the moment. I really welcome this report. I think it's very well written, and it's written, I think, with as much evidence as this sort of length of report can really include. I think it's punchy, and I think it takes us to a form of action, which, I agree with Andy, we need to make sure that there is action at the end of this, but I think this is pointing in that way. The only thing that's wrong about this report is that we weren't looking at it 3 years earlier than this, but we are looking at it, and I think that is the important thing. There are two main reasons why I think this is a really good report. One is that it brings the benefits into the equation. I mean, there's always been in the past a temptation to talk about this subject as though it's all about sticks and penalties and things that you wouldn't want, and they have got separated from the benefits that can be achieved by doing this. And this can only sensibly be considered if we bring both things into the equation, and that we set ourselves some standards in terms of the benefits we want to secure from it. And I think this report's taking us in a very good direction by starting that. The second reason that I think it's a really good report is that it finally includes all the mainstream options that I think that we need to be talking to the public about. The reason why this has not come to our agenda 3 years ago or any time between then and now is that it's been very difficult to get everyone to agree that we actually want to hear what the public think about this range of options. My argument has been that unreasonably the options around road charging no one's ever wanted to include those, and there's very considerable evidence to say they could be the most effective. They may not be the ones that get chosen out of an exercise of further investigation and consultation, but it would be simply incomplete, intellectually dishonest if this was not a strand in what we went forward with in that range. If I have, there's a couple of other points to make. One about the cycling, and I obviously agree as a cyclist that cycling is not written into every paragraph here. But if we think about what we're trying to achieve here, it's about having more car-free roads, then we surely must be moving in a direction that most cyclists would want us to do in order to provide a safer and healthier environment for them to cycle, and even to open up the opportunities in a few places to reallocate road space where that is available to do. And I think that that's not to say it's a cycling scheme, but to say this is a direction of our policy which really can deliver for cyclists. I think that if there's a statement on page 47 of the report, which is quite a lot is built round actually. It says in Greater Cambridge that the estimated revenue cost of an enhanced public transport is £20 million per annum. It's quite a bold statement. It's not really justified. It's maybe some way of putting some sort of benchmark down that we can come back and critique for ourselves in the future. My observation is that, especially when you hear the contributions of Councillor Wilson and Councillor Massey, that I don't think it's right to dismiss those contributions as not strategic, because what they are saying is, are we being ambitious enough in our figure here? What is the route to make sure that we aren't only talking about frequent, regular, reliable services in larger villages, but what actually is that story to people in smaller villages that aren't very connected at all at the moment? And I don't think that's a parochial question to ask, and I think that we are going to have to deal with that, and I think that is also true in some parts of the city as well, which don't feel very well served by public transport. Now, the final point I wanted to make is, and what I think is really critical as we go forward with this, is that there are huge temptations for people at different times to be divisive about this subject. I mean, I think there's some quite good figures in here which demonstrate that actually we are all in this together. I think it says somewhere here that 50% of the journeys in the city of Cambridge are point to point within the city. Many of the rest will be people living outside the city. The congestion, the unhealthy air, the time given up to sitting in queues, it's a shared problem. It isn't only the city's problem or only the people living outside the city's problem. And so I think we need to be really careful as an assembly, and then people can disagree with me and probably will in due course, but there will be parts of this that are quite difficult as we go forward. The easy way to pull us back and to stop progress is to start divisive politics. And I think that we consciously need to address ourselves to the broad totality of the area of Greater Cambridge and not try and separate the needs between us, because I think that we can gain an awful lot if we stick together.
Thank you very much. And you aren't the last speaker because Councillor Soller wants to come in.
Thanks, Chair. I will be brief this time. Just to echo Dr. Williams' point and Eileen and Peter, I think we, in regards to this second big conversation, we do need to bring it alive to the villages of South Cambridgeshire, but also make sure that the wording of the questions is meaningful for them, and the material that goes with those questions is really vital. I mean, it's good to see the questions, but sort of seeing the material that goes with that, it's obviously in development, so I understand that it couldn't be here. What I did want to pick up on as my main point was that, and I'm surprised no one else has mentioned it, but it talks in 9.6 about an option for exploring views through a citizens' assembly. And given that this could be a controversial issue, I do note, I think they had a People's Assembly with regards to the referendum on abortion in Ireland earlier in the year, and was very successful in terms of being followed by the public, the ins and outs of the discussions that assembly was having. And it seems like a very good idea. So retaining it as an option, I would fully advocate it as an option that be taken up as part of this process, and is engaged, and is an assembly that doesn't just engage the citizens involved, but it encourages other people to be engaged with it too. Thanks.
Thank you very much. Well, almost everyone had something to say on that item. We began with Councillor Wilson pointing out that people are already stranded in Cottenham, which is one of the biggest villages in South Cambridgeshire, and how much more difficult it must be in many of the smaller villages. Councillor Massey stressed that it was essential to bring public business and traders with us, and she wanted faster and especially cheaper public transport, and she said that was the goal, that was the end we should set out in mind with, and build whatever solution on that basis. Councillor Kavanagh asked how do cyclists fit in. Mr. Walkinshaw told us not to forget all the people coming in from outside Cambridge, and indeed not necessarily heading into the city centre. I mustn't fail to cater for them as well. Dr. Williams referred to the call for evidence in 2015 and said that city access was the #1 issue for businesses, and also pointed out that pollution affects the routes into the city as well as the centre. We must not kick the can down the road again, and he stressed how important it was to ask the right questions in order so that the questions are comprehensible, and more importantly perhaps that they give meaningful answers to enable councillors of all flavours to understand where the public are on this issue. Councillor Topping said that there's still not enough in this paper for South Cambridgeshire, and he recited a point which I quite regularly say myself, which is that a huge amount of the economic growth around here is actually happening in South Cambridgeshire, not Cambridge City. So there has to be more for the villages. Dr. Wells said the emphasis on journey times was key, but he stressed not to forget the villages, places further out, and to look at whole journey times, including by other modes of transport. Suggesting that a useful exercise would be to consider what will the world look like in 2030, and then work backwards, how did we get there? Councillor Bajent said that everyone thinks this is someone else's problem, but it is in fact a problem for all of us. To make the city centre more attractive, we do need a bit of a stick. If we just let traffic grow, we will have failed. I myself had some concerns about the practicalities of charging for road space. Councillor Bick welcomed the paper and stressed towards the end that we should, on all accounts, avoid divisive politics. It's essential to explore all possibilities. And Councillor Solong also stressed that the wording of the questions needed to be meaningful, especially to residents of the villages. And finally, he welcomed the possibility of a citizens' assembly. And before we close on the item, Councillor Bates.
Just a couple of observations, Mr. Chairman. A couple of words which have not been mentioned, and that's rail. We all know we've got a new station in the north and therefore possibility of East-West Rail and one in the south. So I think that's an interesting thing which has not been mentioned by any of the Assembly. So as you know, I'm also keen to ensure that we do progress rail, and that has great potential, not just actually going towards Bedford but also going towards Newmarket and bringing in people there. The questions I think are quite crucial. I understand the local. I live literally just outside of the South Cambs border. Most of my residents commute for shopping, leisure and work into Cambridge. We were not part of the last big conversation. We must rectify that because a lot more people will commute from places like St Neots down the 428. There's big developments there. Technology was the other interesting, not mentioned today, which I think actually is something that can really positively impact on journey times, i.e., well, if you have good broadband, you don't need to come in the first place, do you? So I think technology and the Smarter Cambridge project are quite important as well. And I think that's something that can be taken forward. But it seemed to be just an observation, Mr. Chairman, and bring that to the attention of members. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Right, well, we gave that a very decent airing too, I felt. And that brings us on to Histon Road cycling and walking improvements. The way I'm going to tackle this is to hear the officer presentation. We're then going to make reference to a statement from the chairman of the Local Liaison Forum and several other pieces of correspondence. I'm then going to have the 4 public questions, and then the officer is going to respond to those questions, and then we're going to have the debate. Are we ready then? Yes, so off we go. Yeah.
Thank you, Chair. Members are aware this scheme has been in development for quite a while in terms of the improvements along Histon Road. You'll also be aware that I've said previously that this road we are trying to balance the various needs of road users, walking, cycling, and indeed the local community. And I emphasised previously and would emphasise again the impact of parking along the corridor to deliver the additional capacity that is required to make improvements for public transport and for walking and cycling. There's been a degree of sort of chatter in terms of the scheme itself in the recent days. And I think in large part because of changes that have been made following the consultation. I think the chair of the liaison forum outlines the process that was undertaken in terms of a previous discussion at the liaison forum that went through the changes. And I think, bless you, I think everyone's received a sort of written correspondence of that, in that changes made following the consultation, moving bus stops, dealing with the parking issues, and particularly around pinch points on segregation or non-segregation of the cycling options. And I think that's been sort of fleshed out in the report. The principal point of outstanding concern has been around the Gilbert Road junction, and whether the access at that point is a segregated access for walking and for cycling, or it is a shared use access. We've done quite a bit of work over the period with road safety colleagues. We've held the liaison forum in October, and the view that we've come to presently is that that needs to be a shared use to deal with potential road safety and conflict issues at that point. Nevertheless, and what's not in the report is we've agreed to a further liaison forum to take place a week on Monday, at which we can review that particular point and one or two of the other points that are raised in the questions specifically to see whether we can make yet further improvements on the scheme to ensure that everybody supports all aspects of the scheme as opposed to people supporting the vast majority of aspects of the scheme, as is presently the case. There's quite a few detailed questions, Chair, so if I hold it there and then maybe pick up the detailed response there.
Right then, the chairman of the Local Liaison Forum isn't able to join us today, but he's circulated a statement, and I hope everyone has had a copy of this. I think the point to which I would draw particular attention is that a Local Liaison Forum meeting is set for the 26th of November at 6 o'clock, and that will be between this meeting, obviously, and the meeting of the Executive Board, which will be deciding the item. So that takes us to the public questions. I don't have a list of them in order in front of me. Right, yes, sorry, here I am. Right, thank you, thank you. So we have Anna Williams. Yes, thank you. Sorry for my slight confusion there.
Microphone.
Hi, thank you. I'd just like to clarify that although the final question was emailed in by our trustee, Matthew Danish, this has actually been written and prepared by me and refers to my family, particularly my young children. So I'm speaking today on behalf of CamCycle's 1,300 members, but also my own family. After too many scary experiences on Histon Road, I no longer cycle there with my children. Many people wrote in our Cambridge cycling survey that they avoid Histon Road under current conditions. If existing cyclists already steer clear of Histon Road, and if the proposals are only a slight improvement, then how can we expect new people to take up cycling here? We believe that the current designs for the scheme fail sufficiently to improve safety for cyclists. Research consistently proves that the main barrier to cycling is feeling unsafe on the roads. This is even more true for women and older people. We believe the current designs fail to improve conditions for pedestrians. Lost trees, interruptions at minor side roads, and being forced to share narrow pavements with cyclists around busy junctions will not achieve the goal of a safe and pleasant community, and they won't help people with visual impairments. We believe the current designs betray the community process by jettisoning years' worth of input from local liaison forums, workshops and consultations. For example, the popular Gilbert Road segregated junction design vanished last week, even though it was supported by the LLF and 2/3 of the public in the most recent consultations. The current plans now look very similar to the discredited Do Something design of 2 years ago. We believe the current designs for the scheme are no longer value for money and will fail to achieve a modal shift to sustainable transport. This plan misses a once-in-a-generation opportunity to make a true difference for walking and cycling on Histon Road. So we would like to ask the Joint Assembly if they agree with CamCycle and local residents that the project needs to reincorporate the LLF resolutions that have been dropped. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We now have someone from Windsor Road Residents Association.
No, she's not present, and she hasn't asked me to represent her.
Right. The question has been circulated, and obviously we will give a reply. Okay. Sorry about that. And all right then. So Lillian, we have 2 questions from you, I think. I'm so sorry. Yes, I'm responsible for letting the discussions run on, but that's my prerogative.
Yeah. Well, I would start with, as you noted before, that no, don't put the green light on yet. I'm not reading. Okay. And because I want to say that I received the first information when I arrived in this place and today about the new LLF, so I wasn't aware when I sent in the questions. That's what I wanted to know. And also I'd like to ask my chair what he means by formal request, maybe something for the LLF regulations that you're working on. Now I'm going to start. Now you can read the green light. So since Histon Road final design includes so many changes in certain designs, which have not been discussed and decided at an LLF meeting, and since our request to have an LLF before the Joint Assembly was denied, it is evident that an LLF is necessary before the next Executive Board on December 6th. The demonstrations at the October 8th workshop of proposals were not presented as fixed according to the project manager. So changes after the consultation was the Gilbert Road, Warwick Road, and Histon Road junction design, which is the major concern. The approved LLF design was presented in the consultation and was supported by 68.6%, no opinion 15.8%, and opposed 15.4%. This has been ignored, and a new officer's design is presented in the final scheme, which has not been discussed in the LLF. The Carisbrooke Road junction design has never been discussed in LLF and was not included in the consultation. There was only a question if we wanted it. We believe the bus lane should not stop in the middle of the junction, but well before to allow the private car lane to join the bus lane and not causing congestion. So on the request of the Histon Road Area Residents Association, please can a meeting of the Histon Road Local Liaison Forum be organized in good time before the GCP Executive Board on 6th December. Thank you. That was the first one. Second one. Do I need to press a button now?
No, you're on. Keep going.
Okay. To create a vision of an avenue of trees as an entrance into the iconic historic centre of Cambridge. The very long, approximately 150 metre more of wooden fence has been modified in the Histon Road final design to a steel mesh fence with climbers. This new change has not been discussed at any LLF meeting, nor with the residents living between Blackwell Road and Brownlow Road, having their back gardens bordering into the intended fence. Although the steel mesh fence with ivy and the verge, or ivy or climbers, I should say, and the verge with species rich grass may be an improvement, the length and the height of the fencing is of concern. 1, to safeguard residents' privacy, the height of the steel mesh fence must be 3 meters, which according to the project team is available. 2, the sloping verge requires a drainage construction towards the private property boundaries along the full length of the intended fencing due to the high water level surroundings. 3, both 1 and 2 will be maintained by the highways. 4, none of the private fences will be removed. 5, and most of all, to create interest in this long fence, we request that a tree of 3 to 4 meters height will be placed in the verge at every other panel. So on the request of the HRR, please can the Joint Assembly recommend that the above points be incorporated in the final Histon Road design to be discussed at the next LLF meeting and the Executive Board meeting at December 6th. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Members, I should also draw your attention to the yes, could someone press the button? Sorry. Thank you very much. Okay, yes, we've also had, I think many of us, I'm sure all of us by email, and they are printed in front of us, and I hope they've been distributed to members of the public as well. We've had some correspondence from Mr. Flynn and Roxanne de Bow for CamCycle and Daniel Thomas. Do you want to chip in on the representations? No? Yes?
I do actually. Just to say that I'm concerned that for the second time today we're hearing from the general public that they're feeling betrayed, and that we've had an enormous amount of emails. I think everyone here has had an enormous amount of emails along that subject on this. And so I think there's a few things we need to think about. And I'm going back to actually your comment, I think it was your comment, but cycling makes you feel like you're free, which it does. But that can only be achieved if cyclists feel safe. And if they don't feel safe, they won't cycle. And we know the best way for feeling safe is segregated cycle lanes such as Hills Road, because we know it works. We've seen the numbers of cyclists increase along that route. So I think we really do need to think again to make sure that we take in all stakeholders on this journey with us. So they know that what they've got to say is important. Otherwise, what's the point in the conversations? No, conversations. And in this case, we really need to look at who and what is important in safety. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Well, we'll come back to the debate shortly. But first of all, I'm going to invite the officer to respond to the questions and correspondence that we've received. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. I mean, I think actually that's a helpful starting point in that we are trying to bring all of our stakeholders with us. This is a scheme where there is an element of compromise. If we want, as we aspire to have, a fully segregated cycle system across the city, the reality is we need less other things going on. And in the case of Histon Road, you need less traffic. In the absence of less traffic, we have to balance the various priorities that we've got. And our overriding consideration has to be the safety of all users. So we've gone through the process with the liaison forum, and we had a conversation at the last session where the vast majority of changes were broadly supported, not by everybody, but there was concern about this particular junction at Gilbert Road. And for that reason, that's why we're going back round the loop with CamCycle and with the liaison forum meeting on the 26th to see whether we can achieve sort of compromise on that again. But there is a balance we need to draw, and we're not going to be able to get everybody absolutely signed up on all aspects of the scheme because there simply isn't the room to do that. So again, that would be my sort of response to CamCycle. The scheme has fundamentally changed since their involvement over time on this. And an awful lot of the improvements have been banked and assigned. What we've got is an outstanding issue that we are trying to resolve, but I can't sit here and say we'll guarantee it to everybody's satisfaction because there simply isn't the space to do that. I think in terms of the residents' question, it was about an additional liaison forum, so that's now in place. And indeed, Lillian's first question, an additional liaison forum. Lillian's asked a series of sort of detailed questions around the height of planting around the mesh, and we will be in discussion with the adjacent property owners as to what that looks like. There will be a need for a drainage system in place, and we're working on that. Yes, we're working with the County Council in terms of the adoption process to make sure it's in place. We're absolutely not removing any private fences, and we're continuing to work on the landscape designs here. So hopefully I've covered that, and then we can open up to the wider conversation.
Councillor Bates, you have no, right? Okay, right then. So members, Councillor Wilson, you are first on the list.
I'll just get 2 points. My first point.
Your microphone, please. Yeah.
Rookie error. My first point is just a general point about consultation. I'm very pleased to hear you say that you're going back to speak to the LLF, because the overwhelming sense that I received from all the correspondence I've received over the last few days is people did feel like they'd taken part in a very long consultation process and things had suddenly changed when the document was published and they weren't in on the change. So and we heard it earlier with the Camborne to Cambridge scheme, that people spend a lot of time and a lot of thought and effort taking part in these consultations, and I think we need to value the fact that people are giving up their time for these, and we need to respect them and actually make sure that they're not surprised when something is published. My second point was about the safety of cyclists. My other concern is if cyclists don't feel safe because they're in a shared environment with pedestrians, that they then cycle on the road, and this causes even more conflict between cyclists and drivers. I've experienced it quite a lot, where I've overtaken the cyclist, and last night it happened, the car behind me was hooting at the cyclist on the road, and it was in the dark, and I felt quite sorry for that cyclist. So, and there must have been a reason why they weren't cycling on the what looked to me a perfectly adequate cycle path. So I think it is important that cyclists do feel safe, and they don't feel that they're actually endangering other shared users. That's all I wanted to say.
Councillor Bajent.
Thank you, Chair. I think that unlike the earlier discussion about the Camborne to Cambridge route, the consultation here has been taking place with people that are actually using the road and using the transport source. And that you've had a conversation which has been inclusive of the Cambridgeshire cycling campaign. And now we seem, not you, we seem to have lost faith with them. Now, the majority of the work being done on this road wasn't to improve the flow of traffic. That was part of it, but it was to make it safer for cyclists. We make an argument in our brochures that the improvements to cycling infrastructure in terms of safety and user experience with segregation where possible by reducing space available to private vehicles. That's one of our arguments. And yet when it came to the push and the shove, the cyclist ended up losing out. Now, as a cyclist on Mill Road, which taking part in that is like a dangerous sport to me, I realise the arguments that the cyclists are making here, close to my heart, close to the people of Cambridgeshire's heart. So many of us travel by bike, and every time you discourage a potential cyclist, you're bringing another car onto the road. So there's been a loss of faith here somewhere. We've negotiated on we've talked about a way that we will get Histon Road dealt with. And then we've changed our position. How did we come to change our position? I asked for the safety officers to come to this meeting today to explain to us how at almost a 12th hour what we've designed isn't acceptable. Because we had an agreed or an approved design. Now, my mind moved forward now to Milton Road, where very similar circumstances have just been the subject of a consultation, where roundabouts have been in conflict with how many lorries are designed by the safety people to be able to go round a roundabout, and who gets pushed to one side is the cyclist, so that we can get two lorries adjacent to each other going round the roundabout. We need to be careful here, because if we start to lose the cyclists because they believe it's not safe to cycle, then our congestion problem doesn't just go up, it goes up exponentially. We only have to look at what happens when it rains and the cyclists get off their bike and get on a car in Cambridge to realise how much impact that could have. So I'm sad that the safety officers are not here to talk to us about why they changed the plan that had been sort of agreed and approved. I'm sad that's happened, and we have lost faith with an organisation that doesn't represent villages and towns, it represents the people that are actually on the road saving pollution, saving journey times. I could go on, but...
You made the point very strongly there, Councillor Bick.
I agree with what Councillor Bajan has just said. I think actually it's not only about a loss of faith with a group of people, it's the outcome that we want as a result of that relationship working that is missing to me as well. I mean, I think that this is a scheme for Histon Road which has started life as trying to improve bus journeys and cycling and walking, and I think that if people are honest with themselves, it's probably not doing a whole lot for bus journeys, and the constraints of the available highway were never really going to allow that. But I do therefore think that if it's still a project, it needs to be a project that delivers on the other two, which is about cycling and pedestrians, and I think it's disappointing that it seems to be delivering so little. So I think it's good news to hear that there's going to be a liaison forum arranged before the board, but to me, I'm still sort of worried that that may be giving an opportunity for some discussion, but may not be sending a message of a nudge that we do ideally would like to have an outcome which gives segregation at the Gilbert Road junction that everyone is talking about, also looks at the way the bus lane relates to Carisbrooke Road junction, and I think that if it's just an LLF that we give, an LLF meeting that we give as an answer to that, I'm just worried that there will be a nice polite discussion, but actually no difference in outcome. And I would much prefer that this came back after a thorough going look at this again and skip a cycle, so that there was an opportunity not only for a meeting between the LLF and officers, but also time for officers to do some thinking about how it might be different than how it's proposed at the moment. The other thing that is concerning to me in terms of the scope of the project is that it really isn't doing anything about the junction with King's Hedges Road, which is you know, a massive issue for cyclists and pedestrians, and there is something written in the report about that's going to be dealt with by someone else. But I would like to have seen more evidence of the template that was being laid down through the city deal, through the GCP, to the people who are going to be responsible for that junction, so that we could satisfy ourselves that it was going to meet decent standards and it wasn't just going to be left to someone else to talk about somewhere else. This is a single stretch of road. That is one of the most difficult parts of it to negotiate, and it isn't covered by this project, and that's a real disappointment.
Councillor Kavanagh, yeah.
Yeah, I'd just like to support what's been said by Tim and Dave. Because just to put it in a context of improvements, we're currently really pleased about the fact that there's going to be a great improvement made to do what's known as the Fendon Road roundabout. You know, it's going to be a full-blown Dutch-style roundabout, which is going to make cycling hugely safe. And in the light of the engineering that is underpinning that project, I'm just thinking there must be a solution for the Gilbert Road junction. It must exist, and I really would like to challenge the engineers to come up with something that will be acceptable to the cycling community and move forward on it. Thanks.
Thank you very much. Heather Richards, yeah. Microphone, please. Yeah, sorry.
I think most of you around the forum here received a lot of emails from public, etc. And I guess the overriding sense is that the consultation failed in some way. It wasn't just that things changed, but they weren't given notice that they were changing until the last minute. And so I guess that's lessons learned on our part in terms of maybe communicating changes to the groups that we've been liaising with before it's put out to the broader public. And I guess the name of this particular scheme says it all, and I think a few of you have brought it up in terms of bus cycling and walking improvements, and that was what we set out to do. So the fact that those specific groups that we were targeting are now highlighting issues, I think is something to absolutely take into consideration. If we're looking for really a modal shift to cycling, which is the only way that we're actually going to achieve our aims, I think that we do have to take a look at the entirety of what's going on Histon Road, and what Councillor Bick said is really important, looking at what's happening at the King's Hedges Junction and then beyond that, because if anybody's actually using that road to commute, if anybody's actually going to take a modal shift from a car onto a bicycle, their journey is not going to begin and end in the middle of Histon Road and end at the junction where Victoria Road is. And it's actually looking at where those journeys are starting, in some cases where it joins with the A14 coming on. And if you can't make that entire journey safe, people aren't going to get on a bicycle. So thank you.
I myself commute from Cottenham to Cambridge on the B1049 through Histon Road, so I have taken a very close interest in this paper and the evolving scheme over the... Yes, am I indeed declaring an interest? Yes, possibly I am. Does no one else seems to want to speak on... Oh, Councillor Solomon. Okay, sorry, yeah.
Just to echo the comments been made all over the place, but I'd really like to challenge you, Peter, on how on earth this happened. It seems like a spectacular own goal and failure of process. And I can't remember the previous assembly or the assembly before that, we had a report back on how well we were performing as an organisation on our public engagement. And this seems like a complete failure. So what went wrong?
Okay, before I allow Peter to answer that question, give him time to think about it, I don't think there's any need to sum up what everyone said, because everyone seemed to be saying the same thing. And I thought Councillor Bagent made the point most succinctly in saying that everyone you discourage from using a bicycle, you add to oh, I'm so sorry. Councillor Topping.
Sorry, I just wanted to give a bit of context and say that my understanding is that the A1307 consultation with the public has gone exceptionally well.
Right.
So, you know, springs and roundabouts.
No, thank you very much. Thank you very much. Although I think there's a general feeling that something hasn't quite gone right with this one, isn't there? Yes. So we're not getting it all wrong, Councillor Solomon, but I think there's a feeling around the table that something hasn't gone quite right with this one. Councillor Bates, would you like to say anything before we let Mr. Blake respond? Right. Okay. Yeah.
I suppose I refer to the input that the chair of the liaison forum has come up with, to say that this was discussed and that all of the changes, apart from one, received broad support. That's what the chair of the liaison forum has outlined. I recognise there is a concern over the Gilbert Road Junction. We recognise that. But I've said repeatedly when this scheme has come to this forum and the executive board that we are balancing different priorities. And the key component we have to have it foremost in all of our thoughts, certainly in my thoughts, is the safety of all of the users there. We will continue to go back round the loop, which is why we've arranged an additional liaison forum. We will see what we can do to try and resolve this issue, because it would be great if all users supported all aspects of the scheme, albeit we're trying to balance the various priorities in that. I do want to make a particular point around Councillor Bagent, because I think he makes an important point regarding Milton Road, in that whatever we end up with here on this particular junction, this is not the only approach we will take on junctions. I think we cannot be saying, what we're not saying is that this is a one-size-fits-all. Each of the junctions on Milton Road need to be looked in their own right. We will continue to work to get a resolution that everybody supports on this one outstanding issue with this scheme.
Chair, could I just ask for an answer on King's Hedges Road?
And I'm looking to...
I think you may mean Darwin Green, Tim. Sorry, Tim Bick, that is. I think you're referring to Darwin Green junction, I think.
Well, I'm talking about the King's Hedges Road junction, which I think is close to where the junction is going to be. Maybe it's a crossroads, but the junction that's there at the moment is King's Hedges Road. Yep. Well, we can call it, it's in the plans.
So just to clarify, the King's Hedges junction is the junction that is currently there, and we're not looking to make any changes to that junction. The Darwin Green junction is not currently there and is being delivered by the developer of the Darwin Green scheme. And we're working with that developer to try and influence the proposals which were agreed some time ago.
I'm just fumbling with these. Okay. Carry on.
I'm about to wrap up.
Oh, okay. Right.
Or move to the next item. Are you able to?
Well, I am talking.
Councillor Bajan can fill the gap while you're.
Yeah, I am talking about the King's Hedges Road junction.
Sorry. Yeah.
I know there's no action proposed there, and I'm wondering why that is.
So I think in previous proposals, looking back, that junction was looked at in quite a lot of detail, and I think it was just decided it was out of the scope of the scheme. There wasn't particularly much it was felt that could be done at the time, and also given that we don't exactly know how the Darwin Green junction is going to look, it was felt that it was prudent to actually leave that King's Hedges junction until we knew what the Darwin Green junction would actually look like and how that area would function.
So, Chair, if I could...
Yeah,
I mean,
draw this out.
That's an answer to the question, but what I would like is if the GCP was not going to just cast that out into the middle distance with no real owner of the issue, because what you've said in your answer is that there will come a time to look at that, and I would like it that the GCP is taking that under its wing and intends to influence that along the standards that it should be looking for along the whole of Histon Road.
We agree.
Okay. Councillor Bates? Okay, all right. Councillor Bajan? Yeah, sorry.
Thank you. Sorry, but Peter, when you talk about broad support, when you lose the support of the Cambridge cycling campaign, that they walk away from it, then that's not broad support. And I understand from Mike Todd-Jones, who's a very eminent and well-respected councillor, that it wasn't really broad support. People went along with some stuff and they definitely disagreed on the main problem. But what you haven't answered is how did we come to change what was given the first set of support? How did we come to change that? Why did we stop prioritising walking and cycling and start prioritising cars and vehicles on the road?
The issue, the safety concern is the conflict of walkers and cyclists at this particular point. That's the issue. So the issue is that a segregated cycle system potentially allows cyclists to enter that point where they come into conflict with pedestrians too quickly. So that's the conflict point. This particular issue doesn't relate to general traffic. It relates to the conflict between cyclists and pedestrians, which is why shared space, the view is it will slow the cyclist down. But as I've said, we will continue to take that away with road safety colleagues to see if we can come to a solution that everybody supports.
Is there any way that it can come back to the Assembly for a further discussion? Because shared space, I've seen shared space at the railway station in central Cambridge. It's chaos. It's absolute chaos. We need an engineering answer, not something that is not satisfactory. If we're going to do all this work, we're going to spend all this money, we're going to cause all this disruption, then we need a better answer. And it needs to be taken away and thought about a bit more.
Just Councillor Bates, you wanted to say something?
It was going back, I think, to Tim Bick's point. I think what I'll ask Peter to do is liaise with the County Council officers in respect of Darwin Green, what's happening there, okay, to form some opinion about the question you've raised, because I don't think the officers here can actually answer the question about Darwin Green because they don't know that sort of detail, Tim. So if you'll allow me to ask the County Council officers via Peter and perhaps come back to what influence that might be. Can I just actually ask, be a little provocative and say to Peter, can we ensure please that the safety officers are present at the next liaison meeting? Because if the issues are about safety, Dave, okay, then I think it would be useful if safety officers can be there. So I think it'd be useful if they can attend if possible, please.
We've asked them to attend.
Right. I'm not exactly sure what could be gained by bringing it back to the Assembly if it's gone round the local liaison forum and safety officers are not able to allow any wriggle room. I'm just conscious of timing here and everything. I'm looking for advice.
So I suppose what I would suggest, Chair, is that your report to the board, as well as changes to the report itself on Histon Road, can very well pick up the significant level of concern here about that point. So therefore, it would be something that the board would be cognizant of as they look at the scheme. On the 6th of December, they would also have the ability to have feedback from the LLF meeting that will have taken place before. So I think it's then for the board to decide whether they've been satisfied that the concerns raised here have been satisfactorily answered through those two mechanisms.
Councillor Massey, yes, I'll let you ask.
So if there's no room for wriggle room, what is the point of it going back to the LLF? I'm just thinking, is that a pointless meeting? Because they've already expressed their concerns very well. If there's no room for wriggle room, there's no point in having that LLF meeting. You may as well just go straight to the next board meeting. But if there is room for wriggle room, then there is every reason for it to come back to this Assembly.
I'm not getting the Assembly bit. I'm getting this. We are trying to reach a resolution that everyone can support, which is why we're going back to the liaison forum. Yeah. Wherever we get to at that point, we will report to the board along with the report that you make, which has highlighted clearly the concerns which you've got with the scheme as it stands. And the board will then decide whether yay, nay, or go back round the loop and do something different. Is that?
Yeah, well, that's how I see it working.
The problem with that is Councillor Massey, I think, is thinking, as well as me, that, you know, we then do not have the right to comment on what is coming out of that LLF meeting. And if, for example, it's nothing, then I think we would want to comment a lot on that, and we won't have that ability if it goes straight to the board.
Right then, can I just gauge how many members of the Assembly feel that way then? I mean, I'm picking up 2 members feeling strongly that way. That's not by any means a majority. Possibly 5. That's still not a majority. I'm not minded at the moment to ask for it to be brought back. I think we should allow the LLF process to take its course, and then for the executive board to take into account whatever comes out of that LLF meeting, coupled with the very strong views which I will be making, drawing on the observations and comments which you have made, I think quite adequately today. I think at that point I'm going to draw that item to a close and move on to the next one. Okay, so the next item is the quarterly progress report.
Thanks, Chair. I will be quick because it's 5:30. Really, as we normally do, this is an update of general progress across the programme. I suppose the thing that I had hoped to be able to tell you was that we had successfully appointed an organisation to deliver us some fairly significant work on skills. We were not able to successfully appoint anyone because the tender returns were not of significant quality to allow us to do that. So having gone through a proper process, we haven't found anyone to do that for us. What we are in the process of is looking at that and going back out to the market as quickly as possible to try and get some more interest, and we hope to be able to do that in the new year. Other than that, I'll take any questions if that's all right, Chair.
Certainly is. Councillor Bick.
On that subject about the skills service, obviously it's a big disappointment, but if we didn't get tenders of the right quality when we did it last time, how is it that that's going to be different? Was our specification wrong in some way? Or is there something, what else do we need to do? Otherwise, don't we risk just rerunning the process and getting the same situation?
Shall I answer that now?
Yes, please. Yes.
So that is a really valid point. So part of the process before we go back out is to work quite intensively with our procurement experts to understand if there's something we can do at the scope, so I guess tweaks, but also what we've done is there were lots of organisations that expressed an interest that didn't put in a final bid, and what we're doing is getting feedback from there's more than 20 of those organisations to understand why they didn't take that next step and put a bid in, as well as getting feedback from the unsuccessful bidders to understand why perhaps they didn't think they quite made the mark.
Dr. Williams.
I appreciate we're all flagging a bit. I'll be very quick then. So I'm a bit embarrassed by this. I'm sorry, I'm on the Smart Places work stream. I still think Phase 2, target completion 2020, 2020, green, when we haven't defined Phase 2, seems a little bit ambitious. Which perhaps it just feels a bit self-fulfilling prophecy that we're green on something we haven't actually defined. So perhaps we should deal with that when we have our work stream next week. And then I would just draw attention, well, I mean, it's a good way of meeting your metrics. And on page 122.7.3, so we put in our bid for CCAV4, which we don't want to go into in great detail, but following some recent discussions about park and ride sites and how they're used, I think it's worth perhaps colleagues being aware that if we did get CCAV4, it would be an opportunity to run autonomous vehicles from surrounding villages to park and ride hubs, and perhaps we should discuss next week how we ensure that we engage those local areas on who might be part of that, because obviously there's concern in the local areas about the park and ride sites, and if they believed there was an opportunity to have non-car access, say they were autonomous vehicle hubs, that might be quite a positive local message. That's a point to make.
Thank you very much. Councillor Wilson.
Yeah, I just wanted to come back to the procurement for the skills strand. Was the bids received, were they low quality because the people concerned are not used to bidding, or are they that they just didn't match what was needed?
I think it was probably a combination. I think there were some quite new organisations that perhaps weren't used to what can be quite challenging procurement processes, but also the quality of all of them didn't hit the mark. So just to reiterate, we're going back and talking to those people to understand and help them, bid again. Thanks.
Any other questions? No, thank you very much indeed, thank you for coming. I know you weren't called, but it's good to have you here. And thank you very much, Niamh, for sticking out to the bitter end, which I don't think I have to sum up that item. Leads me to the date of the next meeting, which will be on the 27th of February, Wednesday at 2 p.m. in the Guildhall at Cambridge. And I'd like to thank everyone for your forbearance in allowing the discussions earlier to run on, perhaps longer than I ought to have allowed them, but I felt they were important and needed a good public airing. Thank you very much.